Chapter 87. Don't look, there are no flowers on my face. There was a saying in the Federation, which roughly meant that the friendship between men was the strongest when they were schoolmates, colleagues, and prostitutes. This meant that they understood each other's most secretive things, such as body size, likes, dislikes, and dislikes. If these three relationships were all present, it would be difficult for these two men not to be strong. Tai Ziyuan and Su Lu should be considered schoolmates during those nights in H1. Although they did not go into the water together today, they knew a lot about each other's first time. Perhaps it was because of these reasons that Tai Ziyuan seemed more relaxed in front of Su Lu than before, and the faint alienation and scrutiny between his eyebrows had lessened a lot. In contrast to Tai Ziyuan's mood at this time, Su Li's heart was a little heavy. He realized that his friend seemed to have a strong background. Some people might be secretly happy that they had found a shortcut to prosperity, but some people would feel a little disappointed. After all, they were not from the same world, so how could they get along for a long time? I'm just a little worried. Su Lu said, maybe your family has a strong background, but do you know who I've offended? I heard that the father of that pair of siblings is a big shot in the Ministry of Defense. Today, he dragged you in, and your bodyguard even injured an active soldier. I'm afraid this matter will be a little difficult to handle. Tai Ziyuan smiled and did not answer this question. He said, I'm in a good mood today, so don't be disturbed by these accidents. Speaking of which, after eating your supper a few days ago and talking to you, my insomnia has improved a lot. However, I've never slept as well as I did today. I slept for 2 whole hours and didn't even dream. When Su Lu heard this, he relaxed a little. He wanted to say that after dancing for 2 hours and sleeping for 2 hours, he was still a normal person. However, when he remembered that the other party's personal butler was also in the car, he changed his words at the last minute. Drinking less coffee and thinking less is better than anything else. There are some things that you still have to think about, Tai Ziyuan said. The black car stopped at the secluded back door of Yue University. After dropping off Su Lu, the car drove into the depths of the campus in the autumn wind. Su Lu stared blankly at the black shadow of the car without any markings. He suddenly remembered that a few months ago, this car had driven into the pear garden like a ghost and almost hit Zhang Xiaoming. Driving into an inconspicuous forest, the car passed the inspection of the special task force agents hidden in the dark and entered the courtyard in front of the small villa. Tai Ziyuan didn't get out of the car. He sat calmly in the back seat. After a long silence, he said, Give Zhou a call. Butler Jean dialed a few numbers on the car phone and connected to the 3rd Military Region switchboard. He said something in a low voice, and after listening for a while, he handed the phone to Tai Ziyuan in the back seat. Tai Ziyuan listened to Zhou Yu's surprised voice on the other end of the phone, and a mocking smile appeared on his lips. After a while, he slowly said, The Federation is a society ruled by law. Shouldn't you and your sister restrain yourself a little? The surprise on the other end of the phone suddenly turned into a tense silence. It was as if he was trying hard to determine what he had done wrong and what had happened in Linhai. Tai Ziyuan didn't give the other party any time to find the truth and try hard to explain. He said calmly, I still have to study in Linhai for half a year. Don't come to Linhai for the next 6 months. Also, tell Yuzi that I'm a very nostalgic person. Don't use your glorious deeds to erase all the old memories. Don't let that person called Hook appear in front of me in the future. After saying this, Tai Ziyuan hung up the phone. Then, he put his hands behind his head and began to daydream. The occasional coming-of-age ceremony made him very happy. This kind of small disturbance wouldn't be able to make his calm and tenacious heart tremble in the slightest. However, when he heard the hooligan surnamed Zhao mention the name by Qi to the soldier on the street, he felt very unhappy. He carefully recalled these emotions that could be called possessiveness and jealousy. He felt more and more that his ancestors back then were really good at grasping the psychological processes of a young person. Young master, I must report this matter to Madam, Butler Jean reported in a low voice. Tai Ziyuan nodded with his eyes closed. He felt a little tired, but the sleepiness made him feel gratified. He smiled and said, The coming-of-age ceremony is over. No matter how much Mother scolds me, It's impossible to change this fact. A man doesn't have a penis, so naturally, I can't make another one. Hearing the young master's rare, vulgar words, Butler Jean frowned slightly. He thought to himself that the student named Su Lu had really infected the young master with a lot of negative habits. However, at the same time, he could tell that the young master was in an unusually good mood today. After hesitating for a moment, he said, "Today's coming-of-age ceremony didn't conform to the family's rules." Taizuan opened his eyes and said with a faint smile, "How did it not conform to the rules? Any girl at any ball at the age of 18. Haven't the rules been the same for tens of thousands of years?" From the very beginning, the current successor of the Tai family had never thought of playing with love. He clearly understood that the rules of the family's coming-of-age ceremony were to tell the future generations that love was something that could be played with. Since that was the case, there was no need to play with those girls who still believed in love. Why not just go straight to prostitutes? There wasn't a ball, Butler Jean retorted solemnly. I made that girl dance in front of me for 2 hours. Taizuan's smile hid the smugness of his youthful nature. No one has set a rule about how many people dance in order to qualify as a ball. 2 people also counts. In the staff officer's office of the 3rd Military Region, surrounded by trees, Zhou Yu, who had been promoted continuously due to his family connections, was currently in a daze. He didn't know that the young man who had hung up the phone earlier was currently joking around in a good mood. He only felt a chill run down his spine. Many years ago, he had gotten to know his younger sister's classmate. However, at that time, he didn't expect that person to have such a profound impact on his future. Although the Tai family had never expressed their appreciation for his father, those who knew of his family's relationship with the Crown Prince would always intentionally or unintentionally help his father to block the thorns in his political career. The Zhou family had some foundation in the first place. However, in recent years, they have been able to receive so much respect from people at that level. What exactly did the siblings rely on to be so arrogant in this society? Why was his father, Zhou Yingxing, able to become the head of a department in the Ministry of National Defense and become a true big shot in the eyes of others? The son never needed to speak. The grasslands and living creatures on the ground were proof of his power. To Major Zhou Yu, the friend he hadn't seen in a long time, or rather, the family he hadn't really come into contact with, was the same. However, today's phone call and the words spoken by that voice were like a blizzard that chilled Zhou Yu's heart. He anxiously thought about what he and his younger sister had done to make the other party so unhappy. His younger sister and Hook were in Linhai University City. Could it be that his younger sister's fiery temper had angered the other party? But why did the other party specifically say that they didn't want to see Hook again? According to his younger sister, the other party had only given her a call and hadn't even seen her. How could they have offended her? He didn't know what he had done wrong. Even if he wanted to make up for it, he couldn't. Major Zhou Yu fell into an extremely anxious mood. This mood only turned into rage when he saw Hook being sent home the next day. One of Hook's arms was broken. What was even more terrifying was that more than 10 of his ribs were broken. The broken bones had pierced into his lungs, and he had been coughing up blood nonstop. Even the military hospital couldn't immediately solve this problem. He had to undergo surgery to save his life. Before the surgery, Zhou Yu, who had already learned about the details of yesterday's conflict, stared at Hook on the hospital bed with a gloomy face. He forcefully suppressed his anger and growled, "I don't care about that Su Lu. I only want to ask you one thing. Did you sleep with that prostitute named Bai Qi? Did you sleep with her?" Hook coughed for a long time before he could complete his sentence. No. When Zhou Yu heard this answer, he felt slightly relieved. He had to admit that his analysis of men's psychology was not wrong at all. He looked at Hook with a gloomy face and said, "You're lucky. Otherwise, we might never meet again in this lifetime." This was the first time Hook had seen Zhou Yu lose his composure like this. He vaguely guessed the true identity of a young man who had been silent the whole time yesterday. While he was shocked, he thought of something else. Zhaoying was also present yesterday. He asked the Crown Prince to let him live. Those people in Linhai were Zhou Yu's collaborators in his plan. However, when he heard this, his calm expression was exceptionally cold. He said calmly, I can't even enter Lin Hai now. Why should I care about the life and death of those people? If their deaths can make him feel better, I'll bring a platoon of soldiers to do it myself. Boss Zhao, who ran the largest nightclubs in Lin Hai, did not die. After he witnessed the shooting incident at noon that day, he was sent to the police station by people who did not know his exact identity. While he was in a state of panic, he found out the bad news that several nightclubs under his company had been raided at the same time that night. It was said that this operation was jointly launched by the Lin Hai State Police Headquarters and the Customs Narcotics Division. They successfully found a new drug, Sky Blue, in those nightclubs. Tai Ziwan did not know about this matter. With the status of the Tai family, they would not put too much effort into a mere underground society in Lin Hai. There were people who specialized in this kind of thing in the small teams led by Butler Jean that specialized in serving the young master. Even a peripheral staff member of the Tai family could easily do this, so Butler Jean did not know the specific process. He only instructed those staff members to do things according to the law. That night, Butler Jean personally came to Star Clubhouse to visit the girl who helped the young man complete his coming-of-age ceremony. At this time, one of the people involved in the great change in Lin Hai with Sulu, the clubhouse's Elist Miss by Chi, had no idea what had happened. Chapter 88. Although she was a little worried about the young, gentle, and rich bad boy, Bai Chi didn't know if Boss Zhao had let him go. When they found out about the shooting at the entrance of the clubhouse, the police had already arrived. After the shooting, Star Clubhouse only closed for 3 hours before reopening. It had to be said that the owner behind this clubhouse was a very powerful figure in Lin Hai. Bai Chi frowned slightly. She thought of the boy who had watched her dance for 2 hours and tormented her until she was at a loss like a young girl. She felt a little uneasy when she thought of his sweet face as he fell asleep in her arms. However, she was only a woman who made a living at the bottom of society. Other than asking around, it was impossible for her to have the intention to help him. She wasn't used to staying in her own lounge. Although it was exclusive to high-class prostitutes like her, she always felt that it was too quiet. It was the lounge where Su Lu had been playing cards all afternoon. Everyone felt a little strange tonight. After the incident in the afternoon, it was expected that the clubhouse's business would be much worse at night. However, it was almost 8 o'clock, and no one had rung Bai Chi's clock yet. Chi, come to the general manager's office. A gentle voice came from the communicator. It seemed to be the boss's voice. The girls in the lounge became nervous and glanced at Bai Chi. Bai Chi smiled bitterly. She didn't know what had happened, but she went straight to the 3rd floor. The 3rd floor was reserved for the boss. Bai Chi had only been there once during the signing of the contract. When she came in tonight, she saw an old man with a head of white hair. The boss, who is usually extremely cold, was now pouring tea for the old man in an extremely humble manner. Bai Chi was slightly stunned. Could it be that he wanted her to serve this old man? Butler Jean heard footsteps and turned his head. He looked at Bai Chi from head to toe seriously, as if he was looking at a piece of art. At some point, the boss of the clubhouse quietly left. Only Bai Chi and Butler Jean were left in the room. Bai Chi had been immersed in the entertainment industry for a long time and had seen countless men. However, when faced with this old man's gaze, she began to feel nervous. She felt that under his calm gaze, she wasn't wearing any clothes at all. She was naked like a baby. After a long time, Butler Jean nodded in satisfaction and asked gently, "How long have you been in this business?" "1.5 years. For some reason, Bai Chi answered nervously. "I've seen your medical report. You're a very meticulous girl." Butler Jean smiled and said, "Don't be nervous. I'm just here to see you. Do you remember that young man from this morning?" "I remember." Bai Chi became more and more nervous. "That's my young master." Butler Jean took out an envelope from the pocket of his suit and instructed, "So, from today onwards, you don't have to do this anymore. The address on the envelope is for your accommodation from now on. There's also a check inside. It's a token of our family's gratitude." Bai Chi did not understand the meaning of this sentence and looked at the old man in a daze. Butler Jean paused for a moment before saying with a smile, "I hope you don't misunderstand. We don't want to control your life. You're free to fall in love. If that's the case, please return this key." If you're willing to wait for young master's arrival in that house, please move into that house." Butler Jin's brows furrowed slightly as he said, "However, I hope that you can make a careful and long-term decision. If you decide not to live in that house, please inform me in advance. I don't want anything unpleasant to happen. Trust me." After Butler Jean was done with this matter, he looked at her with a gentle smile and said softly, "You're the luckiest girl in the Federation in the past 20 years. His words were very gentle, but it made Bai Chi feel endless pressure and nervousness. She didn't even know when Butler Jean left, nor did she hear his last sentence clearly. She walked back to the lounge in a daze. Looking at the chattering sisters who were asking her questions, she finally remembered to look at the envelope. The first thing she saw was the address on the envelope. She recognized at a glance that this address was the Huayuan district, the most expensive district in Linhai. She couldn't help but gasp. When she opened the envelope, she saw the check. She nervously began to count the zeros behind the number. She counted for a long time until she felt that her eyes must be playing tricks on her. Every zero was like a small hammer of happiness, hitting Bai Chi's numb heart. Her hands trembled as she held the key and the check. When she thought of the virgin man she had received this morning, her eyes went dark and she fainted happily. The problem lay in area H1. Su Lu rested his chin on his hand and leaned against the edge of the black mecha's operating cabin. He looked at the high ceiling above his head and thought to himself, it had been so many days. Other than him and Tai Ziwan, no other students had entered, at least at night. This phenomenon had long attracted his attention. Even if it was the most advanced laboratory in Yue University, it was impossible for only him and Tai Ziyuan to have access to it. It seemed that area H1 was not an ordinary place. That kid's surname Feng was indeed not an ordinary person. Su Lu subconsciously touched the back of his neck where the chip was planted. Ordinary citizens of the Federation had long treated the chip in their bodies as an organ that accompanied them for the rest of their lives. There was no rejection, no curiosity, and sometimes they couldn't even think about it, let alone touch it. He was different. The back of his neck was planted with a fake chip. Moreover, there were many chips in the metal bracelet on his left hand. Since the fake chip in his body could enter area H1, which was not an ordinary place, it meant that the chip's creator, Uncle Feng Yu, had written into the chip. That was why area H1's identification system gave the chip permission to pass through. Su Lu scratched his head with a headache. He did not have a coffee cup in his hand. The operating program of the first charter was completely open and transparent. It was impossible for the chip in the human body to be written into. It could only be identified by the three-layer surveillance network and given different permissions. Sula knew how Uncle Feng Yu did all this, but he also thought that since he could even make fake chips, anything that went against the common sense or laws of mankind might not be a big deal in front of Uncle Feng Yu. Tonight, Tai Ziwan did not come to area H1. Su Lu waited for a long time, but the voice on the intercom did not ring. Maybe the other party did not know how to answer his question. Su Lu frowned and smiled helplessly. He was indeed very curious about the identity of the other party, but in fact, he was more worried. He always thought that his boring conflict with the Zhou siblings had dragged the weak Tai Ziyuan into it. He did not know if the other party's family would be in trouble. After pondering in silence for a long time, Su Lu gave up thinking about the chip behind his neck and area H1. He began to think about these friends he had met in Yue University this year. He did not know why, but he always had a depressing thought, just like when he was with Zhang Xiaoming. Maybe from today onwards, that rich boy who liked to eat deep-fried pancakes would disappear from his life. He comforted himself. After all, they were not from the same world. It was not bad to have been together before. It had to be said that Su Lu, who had grown up in the remote and desolate Donglin district, still had a vague sense of inferiority in his bones. It was especially so after he came to the capital ring. The buildings, the equipment in the laboratories, the people, and the things that happened reminded him that he was actually just a bumpkin. Even though his mechanical engineering practice classes were better than those of the official students, and even though he had few friends, they all seemed to have extraordinary backgrounds. It was because of this inferiority that he was so strong and stubborn in front of Zhang Xiaoming. It was completely uncharacteristic of his sharp tongue. When he thought of Zhang Xiaoming, the lights in area H1 dimmed a lot in Su Li's eyes. He stared listlessly at the soft white light emitted by the ceiling lights. His hands were quickly assembling something beside him. He did not even look at it. His hands were assembling an antique simulation system. He had spent 1 million Federation coins to order this from the Shell Motor Company. Thanks to the Federation's smooth logistics channels, this antique system was in his hands in only half a day. The manual and schematic were already engraved in his mind. Relying on the metallic sensation from his fingertips, he quickly assembled the parts together. It was as if he was not worried at all that he would make a mistake. 1 million Federation coins was enough to buy a very good apartment in Linhai. When he heard the signal beep 3 times, Su Li knew that the assembly was a success. However, he was thinking about this sentence in his mind. This 1 million was the money in the 3 Lin United Bank car that the uncle had left him. He had originally planned to save it to buy a house for himself and Zhang Xiaoming in the future. However, it seemed that the female owner of the room had suddenly changed her mind. Therefore, he silently and angrily ordered this system. He was not one of those women. Spending all the money in his hands did not make his gloomy mood any better. Putting aside the simulation system that was as soft as skin but heavier than a wrestler, he opened his backpack and took out the electronic components that he had prepared for several months. He silently began to assemble another tool. This time, Su Li was clearly much more careful. He gently pushed on the metal bracelet. A faint beam of light shot out and projected an extremely detailed and complicated schematic diagram on the smooth inner surface of the mech. He stared at the schematic diagram and seriously assembled the components that were removed from the various common Federation tools in his hands. He did not even blink. He was very serious. Su Li was in a bad mood. 50% of it was because of Zhang Xiaoming, 30% was because of what happened today in Tai Ziwan, and the remaining 20% was because of his fear. He didn't know where he was going to go in the future. There was a fire burning in his heart, but he couldn't find a way to vent it. Habit became second nature. He seemed to have returned to the operations room in the Donglin district mine pit. He lowered his head and focused on repairing everything that he could. In that microscopic and quiet world where no one could disturb him, he calmed his emotions. Time gradually passed as he focused on his work. He did not know that the sky outside was almost bright, and he also did not know that in Yue University's gymnasium, which was only a wall away from Area H1, preparations for the next day's mecha show had already begun. The mecha show by those proud and confident military officers from the Federation's first military academy. Chapter 89. In the beam data stored in the metal bracelet, Uncle Feng Yu had not left behind any earth-shattering designs. There was no super strong mecha design that surpassed the M52 by several generations, and there was also no secret manual that would allow Su Li to become one of the top mecha engineers in the Federation one day. Thus, Su Li could only start learning from the most basic parts in Yue University. Although he studied very hard, to the point of being very hungry, according to his judgment, he would need at most another half a year to learn everything he wanted to learn. However, the blueprints in the bracelet made Su Li very happy for a long time. If he could successfully assemble this tool, the blue light would light up again, and he would once again have a shocking ability to isolate himself from the Federation surveillance for half an hour. Su Li knew where his abilities lay, and he was also used to seeking self-recognition and that heavy sense of accomplishment from these aspects. After a long time, Su Li turned off the data screen output system on the metal bracelet. After staying in Area H1 for many nights and confirming that there were no surveillance devices here, he dared to use his biggest secret without worry. The coarse high-energy plastic casing in his hand was densely packed with chipsets and activators. It really did not look like a high-end device. Su Li carefully checked every metal circuit on the bracelet and nodded with satisfaction. Most of the work had been completed. Perhaps it would not be long before this crude instrument in Su Li's hand would once again light up with blue light. He would once again be able to freely cross that electronic fence and enter those wild wildlife protected areas. Under the surveillance of HDD, he would silently carry out his work of slaughtering cows. The only problem was that there were a few restricted components that Su Lu could not find any way to obtain at the moment. Regarding these matters, the black market on the internet would not be able to gain his trust. After working for half the night, he had successfully used up most of his energy. A strong sense of fatigue overwhelmed him, and he no longer had the energy to think about anything related to Zhang Xiaoming. His head rested on the soft and highly resistant outer layer of the mecha's control cabin, and he fell into a deep sleep. After an indeterminate amount of time, an extremely strange noise woke him up from those colorful dreams. He rubbed his eyes, feeling a little strange. It was early in the morning, so why would someone disturb his peace? Moreover, Area H1 had always been quiet. His gaze swept towards the direction of the noise, and Su Lu was instantly shocked. This was because he saw two long mechanical arms suddenly extend out from the platform wall behind the mecha, grabbing at him. He instinctively tried to escape from the control cabin, but when the soles of his shoes had already stepped on the smooth surface of the mecha, he remembered that his backpack, the antique simulation system that cost him 1 million, and that little blue light instrument that absolutely could not be seen by others were still in the control cabin. Without spending too much time thinking, he pounced back, but then he sadly found that he had misjudged the operating speed of those two long mechanical arms. When he turned back, he saw a black shadow covering the control cabin door, blocking all of his line of sight. There was a loud sound of electric current flowing from the mechanical arm. It was the sound of alloy components colliding. Sula looked in front of him in shock. The originally empty surface of the operation cabin was now equipped with a translucent door armor. Then he heard an unfamiliar electronic voice. "Pilot, please take your position." The seat of the control cabin automatically extended a strap, binding Su Li's body securely to the seat. At this time, he had already shaken off his previous panic and confirmed that he could leave the strap at any time. Slightly relieved, he listened curiously to the electronic synthetic voice. "Request for battle training? Accept." The electronic synthetic voice rang out. Sula was taken aback. Could it be that the origin of chaos had returned? But why wasn't the holographic screen displaying the virtual scene today, and why was the mechanical arms automatically fitted with translucent armor? Could it be that they were going to engage in real-life training? Thinking of this possibility, he suddenly felt a little excited, and the fire that he had been suppressing all this time began to rise. The young fugitive Su Lu had been holding back for a very long time. After experiencing the taste of sex for the first time, he had suffered a major emotional setback. After waiting for Tai Ziyuan for a few more hours in Star's clubhouse, he was almost drunk from all that fragrance, but there was no outlet for the fire in his body to vent. Even if he focused on his work for half a night, there was no way to calm all his emotions. If the Tai family's bodyguard had not made a move, perhaps Su Li's current state of mind would have been much calmer. But there were no ifs. At this time, Su Lu really wanted to operate the giant alloy mecha and have a good fight with anyone. He thought for a while, scratched his head, and then randomly said, "Okay." Following his agreement, the ribbon-like data cables and power cables floating behind the black and prototype mecha all retracted back into the thick wall, and the platform's control panel slowly turned the mecha around. Su Lu stared blankly at the wall that was gradually splitting in two through the translucent protective shield of the mecha's control panel. Only now did he know that behind Area H1 was actually an exit made entirely of alloy. The door opened, and in the bright white light, a lone blue-black mecha was waiting for him in the incomparably spacious battle room. There was no audience, no cheers. Although the blue-black mecha was lonely, it exuded a heart-stopping chill. Moreover, the mecha coldly extended its alloy thumb, arrogantly aimed at the ground. UA University's comprehensive gymnasium looked very normal from the outside, but the building space inside was exceptionally large. This was a rare place in the entire university town where mecha battle training could take place. The university town belonged to the Federation's education system, so very few schools would be involved in the military. UA University, being able to have such a mecha training area, was something that many people could not understand. Today's comprehensive gymnasium was exceptionally lively. Outside the gymnasium, a virtual 3D screen was constantly flashing with greetings to the guests, as well as the flow of this exchange between the two academies. Of course, most of it was an introduction to the first military academy. The main entrance of the comprehensive gymnasium had the words "Welcome" written on it. Who knew whose idea it was to come up with such a shabby method? At this time, there were no longer any UA University students who were still watching the introduction to the first military academy on the screen. This was because as long as one was a citizen of the Federation, there was no one who did not know the name of the third academy. Most of the students, including the professors and students of the other academies in the university town, had already taken their seats in the comprehensive gymnasium, excitedly preparing to watch the mecha performance of the first military academy's visiting team. The third academy was the three major military academies jointly managed by the Ministry of National Defense and the Ministry of Education, entrusted by the President's Security Affairs Committee of the Federation. They were located in the three most important administrative districts of the capital ring. Among them, the one with the longest history and the most resounding reputation was naturally the first military academy located on the outskirts of the capital special district of the Federation. During the barbaric era, when the galaxy was being developed, during the bloody war with the Empire, the first military academy had produced countless famous generals and generals. Whether it was in the military or in the Federation society, they all held a high position. Even if this military academy had produced a high-scoring but a moral hoodlum like Shi Qinghai, its image would not be tarnished in the slightest. Shi Qinghai looked at a quiet area in the comprehensive gymnasium and narrowed his eyes slightly. Soldiers armed with live ammunition were protecting two mechas covered in green dust shields. However, the bodies of the two mechas were so huge that anyone could tell what they were at first glance. On paper, there were only around 400 mecha in the entire Federation. Not everyone had the chance to see this war machine, which was known as the most artistic and violent war machine, with their own eyes. The students of UA University looked at the two mecha covered from head to toe with envy and excitement. If they were not afraid of the soldiers with guns, perhaps they really would have sneaked over to touch them. Shi Qinghai's reason for staring was naturally different from these students. Although he was not a student of the mecha department, he had studied at the first military academy for 4 years, so naturally he had come into contact with mechas. He was only thinking about why the first military academy had chosen to conduct an exchange visit during the Double Moon Festival. UA University was indeed a very good university, but compared to the first military academy, it was really nothing. If the first military academy had chosen to conduct an exchange visit at the capital university, perhaps it would have been more understandable. Shi Qinghai narrowed his eyes and looked at the few familiar faces on the rostrum. Looking at those junior brothers wearing military academy uniforms with stern expressions, he could not help but laugh. He thought to himself that if the purpose of this mecha demonstration was to prove to the Crown Prince that the first military academy was much better than UA University, these juniors' expressions were a little too cocky. The students of the first military academy were naturally proud, and they had the right to be proud. Shi Qinghai fished out a cigarette from his wrinkled suit pocket and lit it. He was a little lost in thought. A few years ago, perhaps his expression was even more cocky than these brats. For today's exchange event, the first military academy had generously used a military transport aircraft to transport 3 mecha from the capital. At this time, 2 of the mecha were still quietly sitting in the dust-proof enclosure, while one of them had already entered the combat room to perform some mecha operations demonstrations. For safety reasons, the combat room in the corner of the multi-purpose hall was designed to be completely enclosed. Everything that happened inside will be transmitted to a large screen for the viewing of the students in the multi-purpose hall. Shi Qinghai raised his head and looked at the blue-black mecha performing elegant dodging movements on the screen. The corners of his lips curled up in a mocking smile. He thought to himself that UA University did not even have a mecha department. This idiot's performance was so flashy, other than attracting scolding. What else could he do? UA University could not possibly ask a bunch of male students to hit him with baseball bats. Chapter 90. For some reason, ever since a long time ago, when the five-man group had established the foundations of various areas of human society, the design of mecha had always been habitually and naturally drawn closer to the human body. There were very few mecha that mimicked ecology, such as spiders or snakes. Perhaps those types of mecha were too ugly and did not fit the aesthetic standards of human soldiers, or perhaps it was because scientists had finally discovered that more support points would inevitably sacrifice the subjective initiative and mobility of humans when operating them. In any case, as science progressed, mecha began to look more and more like humans. It was just that those seemingly indestructible armor and power systems allowed mecha to display strength that was far more terrifying than humans' body. Mecha operation also had a style. This was reflected in countless details, such as the walking curve of a slide, or the necessary height for a leap, or that glance when a mecha tilted its head. Using the words of a traitorous mecha mechanic from the former 2nd Military Academy, what the hell was the difference between a pilot who had not developed a mecha operation style and driving a car? The blue-black mecha on the screen clearly had a strong operation style, and that was flirtatious. In a short 45 seconds of mecha operation practice, the blue-black mecha had twisted its waist a total of 8 times, stomped its feet a total of 5 times, and even raised its mechanical arm twice to aim at the sky in between. It had to be said that this 1st Military Academy student operating the mecha had very strong controllability. Even with so many lewd little tricks added to the mix, the mecha had still not made a single mistake in the entire set of set movements, perfectly passing the 3rd level of the test. Sure Qinghai stared at the screen, which was split into 2 sections. One section showed the actual movements of the blue-black mecha in the mecha combat room, while the other was a 2D display of the 3rd level mecha test footage. Those little movements of the blue-black mecha all became very real mockery and ridicule in his eyes. However, he was not a student of UA University. Presumably, none of the professors and students of UA University would be able to understand what kind of emotions that flashy mecha was currently displaying in vain. Right then, he was guessing which building on campus that Crown Prince should be watching this mecha performance specially organized for him alone. And after the organization found out that Crown Prince was at UA University, when exactly would they take action, and what kind of action would they take? No matter if it was to find a way to get in contact with the other party, to seek the support of the power behind the other party, or to carry out the anti-government army's plan to kill this person, it should not be today. Today, UA University's security could be said to be tight. Right at this moment, a female student from UA University beside Sher Qinghai excitedly muttered to herself, "So cool," as expected of a top student from the 1st Military Academy. This mecha looks like it's alive. The male students beside the female students were also very envious of these war machines that were full of violent beauty. However, after hearing this sentence, their expressions became a little strange. Male animals could praise the same sex with grace, but they were never willing to let the opposite sex beside them praise other males. A trace of sympathy welled up in Sher Qinghai's heart. He said with a smile, "Stretching is considered handsome?" The female student from UA University glared at the guy and said, "What are you talking about? That's the operation of passing the level 3 test. It means that the officer in the mecha is holding back. It's so effortless." Sher Qinghai shrugged and did not argue with her. Instead, it was the male student who came over and asked seriously, "I also feel that there's something wrong with the attitude of that kid in the mecha. He seems to be quite arrogant. What do you see? Gu Haijun has a flag language, but mecha also have a machine language. After all, during battle, if you scold the opponent over the communication device, it would appear tasteless. Moreover, it would be easy for the monitoring instructor to find out. So the 1st Academy's mecha department has always had a tradition of using machine language to scold others. Sure, Qinghai recalled his school days and could not help but laugh. Those twisting and swinging movements are all scolding words in the First Academy. The stretch at the end is even more vulgar. I heard that the First Academy's mecha department tradition has now entered the military. All the mecha warriors in the military know this move. Before every battle, they would scold each other to no end. The male student was stunned. He did not know if this person in a wrinkled suit was telling the truth. His eyes turned a few times, but before he could speak, Sure Qinghai said with a heavy expression, "Many people know this. I believe that some of the professors on the rostrum know this too. Besides, such an arrogant idiot coming to our school to perform a mecha. If this isn't a slap in the face, then what is?" The male student suddenly understood. He smiled meaningfully and patted Sure Qinghai on the shoulder. Then, with a serious expression, he turned around and repeated Sure Qinghai's words to his close friends. At this time, Sure Qinghai had already left his seat. As for why he had exposed the machine language of that blue-black mecha, only he himself knew. The first military academy's exchange students had actually arrived the day before yesterday. These students all had the status of military officers. They were serious in speech and manner, and their faces were cold and stern. In the eyes of the female students of Yue University, this was a handsome and mature expression. But in the eyes of the male students, it was unavoidably a little too arrogant and cold. The male students of the university town all liked mecha, but no one liked someone who was even more arrogant than themselves. Moreover, among those exchange students, there were occasionally one or two fellows with a face full of smiles. Those smiles were all directed at the female students, obviously harboring no good intentions. Therefore, the male students of Yue University had been suppressing their anger for a long time. At this time, they heard that the performing blue-black mecha was using a machine language they did not know to humiliate the students and teachers of Yue University. In a campus filled with the hormones of youth, white clothes fluttering in the wind, basically nothing could be tolerated, let alone this kind of bone-deep humiliation. Angry emotions spread along with this rumor. In less than a few minutes, the thousands of people in the stands showed signs of boiling. Suddenly, a male student cursed loudly at the blue-black mecha on the giant screen. Like a spark splashed into a pot of oil, it instantly ignited the anger of all the male students of Yue University. Countless profanities covered up the explanation coming from the control system and resounded throughout the entire comprehensive gymnasium. Is what the students said true? The principal of Yue University did not know. Hearing the voices coming from all directions, he could not help but frown slightly as he asked Professor Zhou sitting behind him. Professor Zhou came from military, so he was naturally no stranger to this machine language used by military hooligans. His old face had long since darkened. Forcefully suppressing the anger in his heart, he glared at the middle-aged man in military uniform beside the principal and nodded his head. Unbeknownst to him, the principal took a light breath, and a faint smile appeared on his face. The fingers of his right hand began to lightly tap on the table of the rostrum, revealing his true feelings. A few days ago, when he went to the Ministry of Education for a meeting, he was shocked to find that the ministry had actually arranged for the first military academy to come for an exchange visit. Having been in the education world for more than 20 years, he naturally guessed what the first military academy was preparing to do at the first moment. After sneering, he could only agree. However, he did not expect that those student officers of the first military academy, who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth, would actually dare to play their little tricks in front of thousands of people. Beside him, the head of the first military academy's maneuver department, Professor Sun, wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and explained in a low voice, "This is a misunderstanding." The first military academy's level was far higher than Yue University. For this exchange, the first military academy was led by Professor Sun. His level just so happened to be the same as that of the principal. For the first military academy to arrange it this way, it could be said that they were placing great importance on this exchange. Professor Sun originally did not have the slightest fear towards the principal, but when he thought of the principal's warning to be cautious before coming, he began to break out in cold sweat. especially when he saw that damned blue-black mecha on the screen, still playing with those machine language that he thought no one knew. Professor Sun's mood became even more complicated. Yes, he also did not understand why the principal arranged for this exchange to be held. Like those student officers who had their holidays wasted, he also looked down on UA University. However, at this moment, the general library was filled with curses, giving him a great deal of pressure. Principal Tsong suddenly smiled warmly and said, "The students of the First Military Academy are indeed a little arrogant. Looks like they are actually not willing to come to Lin High for this exchange. As teachers, it's best for us not to force them, don't you think?" These words had hidden needles in them. Professor Sun frowned slightly, and the inherent arrogance of the First Military Academy flared up again. He said in a low voice, "This is just a misunderstanding. After all, this is not a battle practice. Student and his mecha operation has always been lacking in some small areas. When we get down later, I will properly educate him." Principal Tsong returned to his silence, ignoring him. He only smiled slightly as he listened to the thousands of vulgarities in the general library, not minding them at all. The vulgarities gradually shifted from the blue-black mecha to the First Military Academy, extremely vicious. On the rostrum, the expressions of those professors and outstanding student representatives from the First Military Academy also gradually turned ugly. The young officer who had been standing behind Professor Sun suddenly left the rostrum and came to the side of the two mecha. He turned on his communicator and spoke into the completely sealed-off combat room. "Restrain yourself a little. The students outside know the meaning of your machine language and are already starting to make a ruckus." In the blue-black mecha's control room, that curly-haired soldier was yawning in boredom. This outstanding student from the First Military Academy was called Anda. He was one of the students with the most outstanding results in the mecha department. This time, he had sacrificed his holiday to come to this kind of lousy place to perform. He was already in an extremely bad mood, always feeling like he was a striptease in a nightclub. When he heard the voice from the communicator, he was momentarily unable to react. He scolded, "What are those idiots making a ruckus about?" Chapter 91. For the third-level test, which had not entered a complete state, was not difficult at all. Passing the mecha was becoming more and more like a performance in that kind of relaxed and boring operation. And the mecha operation that the First Military Academy was proud of was used to kill the enemy on the battlefield, not to dance for those idiots to see. Thus, Endo was in a terrible mood, very angry, and subconsciously expressed his emotions through the movements of his mecha. This was completely just his personal way of venting, but he had not expected that this would be a great disrespect to the students of the university town who had originally come to watch the First Military Academy's performance in high spirits. Because in his opinion, these civilian students who had never even touched the surface of mecha before were at most some pretty boys who only knew how to read motorsport magazines. How could they know anything about mecha and the like? Hearing the steady and cold voice from the communicator, Enda cursed and finally came to his senses. The one speaking was Officer Zhou Yu, the strongest guy in the First Military Academy's motorsport faculty, and also his personal boss. Of course, he would not doubt the other's words. Immediately after, he heard those tide-like curses coming from the communicator, and Enda was stupefied, not knowing what to do next. On the large screen on the multi-purpose gymnasium's dome, that blue-black mecha stood stupidly in its original spot. It did not report to its instructor that the performance was over, but it did not leave either. This further incited the university students to curse the other, because in their opinion, this blue-black mecha's stupidity was really asking for a scolding. Twist some more. I'll break your waist and sell you to the Empire as a prostitute. Are you a transvestite from Bermuda? A faint light enveloped Nda's face. He listened dumbfoundedly to the endless stream of curses coming from the communicator, his heart filled with shock. The students in the First Military Academy were all soldiers. A single word of disagreement was enough to cause them to break out in a fight. Where had he ever heard so many different curses? His face began to flush red. almost unable to control his emotions that were about to explode. When he finally heard the word transvestite, he finally could not hold it in anymore and angrily pressed the button on the main communicator. A bunch of idiots. All you know how to do is talk. What use do the Federation have for trash like you? If you have the guts, get a mecha and fight me. And Da's angry curses rang out through the communicator from the speakers beside the holographic screen in the multi-purpose gymnasium, echoing throughout the entire spacious building. Although the instructors from UA University and the 1st Military Academy, who were in charge of the mecha performance control in the central control room, reacted at the first instance and cut off this brainless fellow's angry curses, they had only managed to cut off the words "last fight." UA University gymnasium instantly fell into a deathly silence. Countless pairs of eyes stared at the completely sealed mecha combat room. If the combat room had not been constructed using super strong alloy, it would have long since melted under the fury of the crowd. This was UA University's home ground, yet the exchange student from the 1st Military Academy was so arrogant. Who could tolerate it? Although everyone knew that no one would be able to accept Da's enraged challenge, the university students naturally had their own logic to consider the problem. They thought to themselves, the Federation government, F*King, sent all these rare mecha to your 3rd Academy and the Westwoods Military Academy. We won't even be able to touch a single one in our lifetime, and you actually dare to challenge us? This was equivalent to someone with a girlfriend challenging a bachelor to the length of time they could have sex. It was equally intolerable. After an extremely short period of absolute silence, there was a sudden outburst of emotions. Even if there were still many students who had maintained their respect for the 1st Military Academy before, at this moment, that respect had long since disappeared. Furthermore, UA University had always been one of the schools where George Carlinism was most prevalent, so they did not have any good feelings towards the Federation's lackeys from the 3rd Academy. F*CK, F*CK, F*CK your mother. This was a very simple and crude reply. Get a mecha to F*CK? Yo, this is the first time I've found out that you can actually have sex while using a mecha. Is this a tradition in your school? I find it strange. How can you have sex while wearing a mecha? Are you going to put on a show for us? This was a very sarcastic reply. The problem is, I heard that the 1st Military Academy's mecha department only has boys. This was an even more vicious heckler. A same-sex mecha sex performance? That's too F*King rare. The students in the university town could not fight, but when it came to sarcasm, how could those natural-born military officers of the 1st Military Academy be able to resist? Caught in a frenzy, Endo was so stifled that his entire face was red. He had completely forgotten that there was no mecha department in a university, much less something like a mecha. He stubbornly pressed a green button in the system and sent out a battle request to any mecha in UA University's central control network. After doing all this, Endo foolishly waited for someone to accept the challenge, but in the end, after a long time, he found that there was no response. He smugly keyed in a command, and the blue-black mecha extended a thumb towards the sky. He cursed heartily, "A bunch of little brats, scolding to your heart's content. Why is there no one who dares to come out?" The main comm system had already been shut down, so the students watching the battle room through the screen naturally did not know what he was saying. However, the thousands of people had noticed the mecha's action at the same time, that big thumb pointing up at the sky. Outside the battle room, Zhou Yu, who had been paying attention to the commotion inside, laughed bitterly. He thought to himself that every time Ado went crazy, even he could not stop him. This brat was probably still proud that no one from UA University dared to challenge him, but he had completely forgotten that UA University did not have mecha at all. Looking at that upturned metal thumb of the mecha, the cursing in the comprehensive gymnasium gradually subsided. This was not some machine language. This was a very clear hand signal. The students of UA University were not so naive as to think that the idiot from year one would repent after being scolded by these people and give them a thumbs up to praise them. They all knew that something was definitely going to happen later, so they all began to hastily search for weapons under their seats. Sure enough, that smug and extremely annoying blue-black mecha on the screen suddenly changed its aura, becoming incomparably arrogant and cold. It slowly turned its right mechanical arm upside down, its thumb pointing towards the ground. This was also not a machine language, but a very clear hand signal, a hand signal of contempt and contempt. After a moment of silence, the people in the comprehensive gymnasium burst into an uproar. Countless shoes were seen flying towards the screen, toward the mecha battle room set up underground. A male student from a class suddenly discovered a baseball bat placed behind his seat and instantly transformed into a grenade launcher, throwing it down madly. For a moment, the wooden bats fell like rain, landing on the metallic battle room. The clinking sounds were like raindrops falling on a lotus leaves, crisp and moving. However, that blue-black mecha on the screen was still smug, its thumb pointing upwards coldly, as if it was continuously slapping the faces of the UA University students. Right at this moment, the angry voices in the comprehensive gymnasium suddenly dwindled, replaced by countless shocked shouts and overjoyed cries. On the rostrum, those professors from the two academies who felt ashamed of themselves looked towards the screen in astonishment. Outside the battle room, those officers from the 1st Military Academy also looked towards the screen in confusion. On the screen, the alloy wall in the deepest part of the battle room suddenly opened slowly, and a somewhat clumsy-looking black mecha slowly revealed its body. Following the appearance of this black mecha, all the discussions and curses stopped, and the comprehensive gymnasium fell into a deathly silence. That was especially so for the UA University students. They stared at that mecha in disbelief, wondering if their eyes were playing tricks on them. Professor Chong of the 1st Military Academy glanced at Principal Tsong beside him in shock. He had no idea that UA University even had mecha. The principal's pupils constricted at first, but a moment later, he revealed a knowing smile. In the eyes of everyone on the rostrum, this smile could not help but appear somewhat enigmatic. When the black mecha on the screen saw the blue-black mecha's thumb pointing downwards, it seemed to be stunned for a moment. Then, facing the blue-black mecha, it raised its middle finger. This was not some sort of machine language. This was a common gesture used by both the Federation and the Empire, a gesture that all children above the age of 3 knew. The comprehensive gymnasium was filled with thunderous applause. The UA University students were very gratified. Although some of the more knowledgeable students could see that this black mecha was only an M-series prototype and was no match for the opponent's M37, they were already very happy that it was able to point its finger at someone. Inside the black mecha, Sula did not know that there were thousands of people watching his every move through the screen. He had just woken up and accepted the battle request, and then saw the hand gesture of the mecha behind the door. The one sitting inside the mecha was not Tai Ziyuan, so it was probably an exchange student from the 1st Military Academy. Su Lu very simply came to this conclusion, and then even more simply used his middle finger to reply to the other's insulting hand gesture. This was because he had been in a very bad mood these past few days. Su Lu thought that this was just an enclosed battle space with no spectators, so he acted very naturally. Through the communicator, he gave the other the order to start. This was his first time operating a mecha in a real battle. He thought to himself that with his level 6 skill of over 10 seconds, of course he would not be a match for these geniuses of the military academy. He only wanted to fight to his heart's content, even if he had to suffer a little. The black mecha looked clumsy, but in reality, its path forward was the most standard straight line, without the slightest deviation. In addition, Su Lu was currently in a very bad mood, so the mecha's operation had an inexplicable sense of heroism. The distance of 20 meters was covered in the blink of an eye. The black mecha's extremely swift and fierce kick landed directly on the base of the blue-black mecha's mechanical leg. The blue-black mecha fell backwards in disbelief, smashing onto the alloy floor with a loud boom. Inside the black mecha, Su Lu stared thoughtfully at the display on the screen, wondering how the opponent had fallen just like that. Although he was very satisfied with the fury, speed, and accuracy of his kick, it had also confirmed that the M37's balance sensor hidden at the base of the mechanical leg would cause a momentary deviation when struck at a 42-degree angle, thus causing the mecha's balance control system to temporarily malfunction. But why hadn't this blue-black mecha resisted? Su Lu was perplexed, unable to believe that a rookie like himself could knock down a top student of the First Military Academy. Could it be that the opponent was a rookie among rookies? Chapter 92. For Anda, an outstanding military officer from the 1st Military Academy's Mecha Department. His trip to UA University in year 66 of the constitutional calendar was an unerasable stain on the very beginning of his career as a professional soldier. This stain would follow him throughout his life and would be brought up from time to time. This was because later on, everyone in the Federation knew that the Su Lu in the black mecha opposite him was just a rookie who had participated in a real battle for the first time. At that time, Anda had been operating the blue-black mecha, and under the gazes of tens of thousands of people, he had even turned his thumbs upside down, smugly, and pretended to be cold as he stared back at the gazes of the tens of thousands of people blocked off by the walls of the battle room. He had even hoped that the gazes of those students from UA University who only knew how to scold others would be as angry as possible, because the other side would not dare to fight anyway, so they would only have the right to be looked down upon by him. At this time, the main comms channel had already been shut down due to his scolding. He did not know that the countless people outside the battle room had already fallen silent. So when he heard the synthetic voice of the system inside his mecha announce that the battle request had been accepted, he was dazed for a moment, and only then did he remember to look at the third vision screen. He saw a black mecha, and also saw that black mecha's middle finger. Thus, Anda began his habitual frenzy and rage, preparing to use his mecha's thick and heavy mechanical arm to make an even more lethal gesture, but in the end, he found that the other had already charged over. Anda's blue-black mecha did not react at all, because in any of the mecha battle practice he had experienced, both sides would always have to exchange a few words out of habit. If they were not on good terms, they might still use machine language to express a few cordial greetings to the other's family, but there had never been anyone who would act like a shrew and immediately start a fight with the other. That black mecha had done just that, and it had done it thoroughly, silently, and heroically pouncing over. While Anda was completely unresponsive, the mecha's leg kicked viciously at the base of the blue-black mecha's mechanical leg. Sneak attack. Shameless sneak attack. Anda cursed loudly in the cockpit, but he was completely unable to stop the powerful vibrations. The ringing in his ears caused him to be unable to control the mecha that was crashing towards the ground due to the momentary malfunction of the balance sensor. The blue-black mecha landed heavily on the hard metal floor with a loud thud. The powerful impact had been mostly neutralized by the ingenious shock-absorbing design of the mecha, and the tough training in the 1st Military Academy had also allowed Anda to dispel the dizziness in his head in the shortest amount of time possible. After confirming that his mecha had not received any real damage, he furiously and rapidly keyed in commands. As long as this blue-black mecha in front of him did not continue to act so shamelessly, he would definitely be able to turn the tables. Piloting the black mecha, Su Lu was taken aback for a moment. Then he believed that this seemingly cold and arrogant mecha before him was indeed a rookie. Since that was the case, why should he be polite? His fingers swiftly keyed in commands on the touch screen, and the mecha beneath him threw out a heavy punch, smashing viciously at the blue-black mecha's lower abdomen. Still at the position where the balance sensor was hidden, the black mecha's mechanical arm swung its alloy fist, making a strange turn in the air. Following the angle of the first kick, it smashed downwards at a 42-degree angle to the right of the mecha's front. One punch, one punch, one punch. The strong vibrations and the slight deviation of the balance sensor caused student Anda, who was angrily transmitting commands in an attempt to get the mech to retaliate, to be dumbfounded. This was because he found that every time he was about to adjust the parameters of the M37 mech, the opponent's fist would always interrupt the process of resetting the balance parameters. Amidst the crackling of electricity, the blue-black mecha kept trying to grab onto the ground, trying to counterattack, trying to stand up. However, as the black mecha's fists continued to fall, it displayed a tragic scene of cramping. There were many types of mecha duels. Under different backgrounds and environments, duels with different degrees of realism would naturally have different degrees of intensity. Today, the first military academy was visiting Pear Blossom University. Although they had generously shipped 3 mecha over and had also prepared an internal mecha duel performance, the mecha's long-range weapon systems had all been dismantled. The M-series prototype mecha Su-Lu was currently operating did not have any offensive weapons, so the battle between the two of them was actually the most primitive form of close combat. And it was very obvious that after being taught combat by Uncle Feng Yu for 4 years, Su-Lu was best at this aspect. In the past year or so, he had crammed in his basic knowledge at Pear Blossom University and had found all the mecha blueprints for the first half of the M-series in Area H. Coincidentally, the last series of these blueprints was the M37. With his outstanding mechanical instincts and talent, as well as his rich practical experience, Su-Lu was incomparably familiar with that M37 mecha. Under his gaze, this blue-black mecha actually did not have those complicated and tough armor on the outside. It was more like a naked object with only an alloy skeleton and a control system. He had already gained the upper hand, successfully finding the M37's weakest link. Under these circumstances, if that blue-black mecha could still stand up, Uncle Feng would probably be so angry that he would be reborn from that beam of white light once more to come out and give Su-Lu a good beating. Su-Lu was a sinister person, but he was not born with the temperament of a hooligan. The opponent's perceived sneak attack was a very normal reaction in his eyes. Since the combat training had already begun, what was there to wait for? The blue-black mecha was already on the ground, so he naturally had to continue attacking until the opponent lost all mobility or until the system judged that he had won. Whether it was the Level 6 virtual test in Area H1 or his nightly combat training with Tai Ziyuan, he was used to starting silently and ending peacefully. He had never considered the concept of a sneak attack. This was a very sincere, wooden, and stubborn attitude. Coupled with the nameless rage and gloominess he had accumulated over the past few days, it formed the ugly image of the black mecha hammering away at the blue-black mecha's thigh. The Black M prototype mecha's power output had already reached 80%. As the instructions entered on the touchscreen screen, it became the mecha's alloy fist that did not know exhaustion, gradually surpassing the sound of the wind. Meanwhile, under the black mecha's fists, the blue-black mecha trembled incessantly. It clearly had not suffered any irreversible damage, but it would never be able to stand up again, only able to be beaten up in agony. With a crisp crack, a small crack finally appeared in the armor at the base of the blue-black mecha's mechanical leg. The mecha's internal balance sensors could no longer withstand the torrential downpour of power, but also the stubborn precision of an old farmer. After a puff of green smoke, they officially stopped working. In the quiet combat room, the system's voice rang out. The Black M prototype mecha was unquestionably the victor. Su-Lu operated his mecha to retreat 5 meters. He still thought that right now, only he and the blue-black mecha opposite him were in the combat room. He had no idea that everything that had just happened had already fallen into the eyes of countless people. The cheers and whistles in the comprehensive gymnasium were already ringing out like a boiling sea. Only Su-Lu was completely unaware of this. The blue-black M37 climbed up pathetically from the metal floor. In the end, it completed the reset of its numerical values, forcibly interrupting the automatic posture adjustment program that the balance sensors were responsible for, changing the mecha's semi-automatic control to full manual control. This blue-black mecha finally stood up, but full manual control was equivalent to half a cripple in close combat. Small, dust-like curly hair floated in the mecha's cockpit, and at the same time, his angry roar drifted in the air. He had never felt so vexed in his entire life. The opponent's operation level was clearly just SOSO. Other than the initial attack speed that had been frighteningly fast, the rest of it was just average. He even looked a little stupid, only knowing how to stupidly let the mecha punch him, not knowing at all that he should attack the more fragile and important parts of the mecha. But it just so happened that he did not know whether the opponent had gotten lucky or not. But the mecha's vibrations would always affect the recalibration of the balance sensors at critical moments, making it impossible for him to carry out any effective operations. Just like that, he lost to a prototype mecha operated by a student from a university. At this time, Anda even had suicidal thoughts. He gripped his own curly hair in agony, glaring furiously at that clumsy-looking black mecha. Of course, it's not a coincidence. Although this black and prototype mecha's operations are not all that great, no matter who is operating this mecha, to be able to attack 147 times in a row, including that initial kick with the mechanical leg, to be able to accurately hit the same spot and all at the exact same angle, that can only mean that this person is very strong, very strong. Outside the mecha combat room, the people from the 1st Military Academy and the teachers from UA University had two completely different expressions on their faces. Zhou narrowed his eyes at the slightly sluggish black mecha on the screen and said to those indignant companions beside him who had accused UA University of launching a sneak attack on that mecha of theirs. We all know where the M37's biggest flaw is, but who would have thought of exploiting this flaw? No one, because the difficulty of operating this way is too high. Although there's no long-range weapon system added in today's battle, making the possibility of the black mecha operating this way much greater, none of us can guarantee that every command we input will be executed accurately by the mecha. This requires confidence in one's own analysis of the brain, and also requires quick judgment of every angle change. A person without confidence would never choose such a stubborn battle method. A confident and strong mecha warrior. I now understand a little why the principal made us sacrifice our holidays to come to UA University to perform. Looks like no matter where we are, there will always be someone worth learning from. The A student of the 1st Military Academy's mecha department, Zhou Yu, smiled and walked towards the mecha combat room. Behind him, the shouts of the UA University students in the multi-purpose museum were like military orders, urging his footsteps forward. He knew that today's matter was Anda's fault from the very beginning. But as a soldier, in front of so many people, he had to ensure that the 1st Military Academy's glory would not be tarnished in the slightest. Chapter 93. On the screen, the door at the back of the mecha combat room opened, and a black and prototype mecha appeared. Countless gazes in Pear Blossom University's gymnasium turned towards it. Amidst their shock, the cheers of the students shook the heavens. They were not sure when their own school had mecha, and neither did they know who was inside the black mecha. However, they believed that this black mecha had stood up bravely for the honor of Pear Blossom University. Facing that arrogant idiot from the 1st Military Academy, just this point alone was enough for them to stop thinking about anything else. All they could do was dedicate their cheers and excited footsteps to that black mecha. And when that black mecha used a method no one had expected to kick down the blue-black mecha, followed by a series of clumsy and persistent punches, until finally the system determined the black mecha to be the victor. The atmosphere in the gymnasium reached an even more terrifying level. On the contrary, the cheers were much quieter now, because everyone was so shocked by this scene that they were almost speechless. Stars began to appear in the eyes of the female students, while the male students gaped, staring at the screen in disbelief. Meanwhile, the rostrum was filled with a deathly silence. The representative of the 1st Military Academy's exchange visiting team, Professor Chong, stood up abruptly and stared at the screen with a face full of shock. After a long while, he finally regained his senses and turned to ask the principal of Pear Blossom University beside him, "What's going on?" Other than the military academies, most universities would not have any systematic knowledge related to mecha. Although Pear Blossom University had some reputation in this area, this university did not have a motorized department. So how could they possibly have a mecha? And that student operating the mecha had actually defeated his own student. Although the combat strategy of the Black Mecha seemed rather underhanded in Professor Cheong's opinion, his doubts and shock made him unable to care about anything else. He stared fixedly at the unknown, wanted to understand how a university and society could have such a problem with mecha. It's just a prototype. The principal of Pear Blossom University smiled and said, "This was specially approved by the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of National Defense over 20 years ago." Then, "Who's the student operating the mecha?" Agitated, Professor Cheong quickly asked, "You should know very well that the Federation's laws clearly state that non-military personnel are not allowed to touch combat mechas." Principal Tsong's eyebrows furrowed slightly, but soon after he smiled warmly and said, "Dean Sheen sent you all here to conduct a mecha show." Those military officers probably don't understand the reason, but you should be able to guess one thing. Our Lihua Academy doesn't have a mecha faculty, but that doesn't mean that we don't have a mecha training ground. As for the identity of the person in the Black Mecha, I think that neither the Ministry of Defense nor the President's Security Committee will have any objections to him touching mecha. Professor Chong was taken aback for a moment, but gradually thought of a possibility. He turned his head in shock to look at the dazed Black Mecha on the screen and said in a trembling voice, "With his identity, how could he choose to appear in front of so many people? Don't forget, he is now our Lihua's student." The principal of Pear Blossom University continued to smile and said calmly, "Since a student from First Academy is here to visit and challenge Lihua Academy, and he is willing to come out and fight for Lihua Academy's reputation, I can't stop him, right?" Professor Cheong was stunned for a moment, and then a bitter smile appeared on his face. If the person in the Black Mecha was really that noble young man, then the First Military Academy's reputation would really be lost today. It seemed that the madam and the young man didn't like First Academy's plan to embarrass Lihua Academy and take back the right to educate the successor of the Tai family. The principal of Pear Blossom University noticed the bitter expression on Professor Cheong's face. He felt as if he had just eaten a piece of wild boar meat, but his face didn't show any expression. He looked at the Black Mecha on the screen and was secretly grateful to the disciple of his old friend for being willing to fight for Lihua Academy's reputation. Yes, the principal of Pear Blossom University looked mysterious because he thought that the person in the Black Mecha was Tai Ziyuan. If it was the successor of the Tai family fighting as a student of Lihua Academy, then the First Military Academy could only swallow their broken teeth. Principal Tsong naturally didn't have anything to worry about. This principal, who was busy with work, didn't know that Tai Ziyuan wasn't the only one who could enter the H1 area of this university. There was also a small gatekeeper that he had noticed before. The shock in the comprehensive library was replaced by cheers. The members of the First Military Academy's visiting team on the rostrum had ugly expressions on their faces. At this moment, the situation on the screen changed again. The blue-black mecha was lifted up and left, while a silver mecha coldly appeared on the field. The black mecha that was preparing to leave was stunned. Then it turned around clumsily and faced the opponent. When the students in the comprehensive library saw this scene, they knew that the proud officers of the First Military Academy were preparing to issue another challenge. They all held their breaths. Principal Tsong frowned slightly and looked at Professor Cheong. He said, "Is it Joyu? If he injures or enrages the person in the black mecha, do you think it's appropriate?" Professor Cheong looked silently at the screen and suddenly said, "Previously, we were just fighting for his performance. Now, it's the students who want to protect the reputation of the first school. Under this kind of premise, I won't stop it, nor am I willing to stop it. I believe that young man should understand that each school has its own pride." Principal Tsong didn't say anything. He just looked at the black mecha and smiled slightly. Sula knew that the principal and the upper echelons of the First Military Academy were now treating him as the heir of the incomparably mysterious and noble Tai family. As usual, he silently finished the battle and then prepared to leave. Right now, he didn't feel too happy. He hadn't even completely vented all the negative emotions that had accumulated over the past few days. This young man was very sensitive and cautious at certain moments, but at other moments, he was a little muddle-headed. For example, right now, he kept thinking that he had just taken a short nap in the Mecca. Right now, it was at most 4 or 5 in the morning. He kept thinking that this was just a warm-up exercise for the visiting students of the First Military Academy and that there were no bystanders. But he didn't know that right now. It was already 10:30 in the morning. Everything that had happened earlier had been seen by countless pairs of eyes and surveillance equipment. He didn't know that right now, UA University had already become a sea of surprise because of his appearance. And he didn't know that right now, those excited students were all guessing who would be able to defeat the top student of the First Military Academy. He had already become a hero of UA University and a hero of the lonely and callous type. He didn't know anything about what was going on outside. He only felt that since the blue-black Mecha was a rookie who was even worse than him, defeating the other really didn't count as much. He was still that pitiful fellow who could only last for 10 seconds at level 6. He had won by luck. What was there to be happy about? After all, he was just a lovelorn youth whose mood was still gloomy. Just as he was about to turn and leave, the system once again rang out with a synthetic voice. It was very clear, request for battle training. Do you accept? Sulu turned his head in surprise. The black mecha turned its head around clumsily, and then saw an exceptionally valuable mecha, glowing with a silver light, appear at the entrance to the combat room. It was still an M37, but there seemed to be some changes in its specific structure. He frowned and looked at the mecha that had issued the battle request through the holographic screen. His mood was very complicated. Could it be that these visiting officer students from the First Military Academy also want to play a tag team battle? He was exceptionally clear about his own mecha piloting skills, so clear that he had underestimated them somewhat in frustration. Looking at the steady and smooth trajectory of that silver mecha's advance, he subconsciously thought that he should not be a match for the other. However, whether or not he was a match was not the main point of Su Li's consideration right then. What he was thinking about was how to vent the gloominess in his heart. It didn't seem to matter even if he was beaten up by the other. This was not self-abuse. It was just the subconscious reaction of a young man with an ordinary personality. After accepting the battle request, he operated his black mecha and walked somewhat woodenly towards that silver mecha. That should be Zhou in there. I heard that his younger brother went to the West Woods Military Academy because he couldn't accept his older brother's excellence. Sitting on the sofa in the small villa, Tai Ziyuan's expression was rather strange. He naturally knew that this performance by the First Military Academy was meant to be a show for him to see, but he had not expected that things would develop to this point. He took a light sip of the champagne in his thin glass and looked at the image on the holographic screen with a half-smile. He muttered to himself, "Sulu, you're in for it this time." The heir of the Tai family and Su Lu would battle every night in the virtual system, so he was naturally very clear about Su Li's true strength. In his opinion, Su Lu had been able to defeat that blue-black mecha in large part because of Su Li's trickery and that idiot's underestimation of his opponent. And now, since Zhou Yu was personally piloting the silver mecha in a battle, what awaited Su Lu could only be an incomparably tragic end. The mecha battle began. Just as Tai Ziyuan had predicted, the black mecha Su Lu was piloting could not even hold up for an instant before that silver mecha. It was like a weed in a storm, swaying incessantly under the precise attacks, an existence that could fall to the ground at any time. With a muffled sound, the black mecha's translucent cockpit door was accurately struck by an alloy fist. Su Lu was stifled by the powerful shockwaves. He stared somewhat blankly at the data displayed on the holographic screen and found that he had no way of avoiding the opponent's attack. Whether it was in terms of speed or control detail, he was on a completely different level from the opponent. It looks like I can only lose, Su Lu thought with some boredom. His fingers continued to rapidly input commands, allowing the black mecha to avoid some critical damage. His eyes stared at that godlike silver mecha, filled with a sense of defeat and unwillingness. Chapter 94. The seemingly clumsy black mecha suddenly froze in its running path. The silver mecha that had followed it like a shadow did not let go of this opportunity. It slammed into the side of the black mecha, converting all the movement that the high-energy battery had given it into impact force. The collision of the alloy surfaces caused a very loud metallic sound to ring out in the combat room. Following the sound, the black mecha was sent flying like a kite with a broken string, crashing heavily into the solid wall. Although it did not shatter into pieces like a real kite, the structural fasteners and joints all made a whining sound as they moved, hissing as if they were about to stop working at any moment. The black mecha slid along the wall. Several parts of the alloy surface that had been damaged scraped against the wall, making a screeching sound that made one's teeth ache. At the same time, several fresh marks were left on the wall. In the end, it fell heavily to the ground, powerless. The power of the silver mecha's previous attack was fully displayed in this image. The cheers in UA University's gymnasium had long since stopped, starting from the moment the mecha battle training started again. Then, following the continuous defeat of the black mecha, even the discussions about who was in the black mecha and the introduction of the most outstanding officer in the first military academy's silver mecha, Zhou, gradually stopped. When the black mecha slammed into the wall and slid down, countless people fell into the most complete silence at the same time. They watched the image on the screen with unusually complicated feelings. At this time, the rostrum had long since quieted down. The professors and officials of the two universities watched the screen quietly. UA University, who did not know the inside story, had regretful expressions on their faces. They did not know which department this black mecha operator was from, and did not expect him to be able to consecutively defeat two strong people from the same department. However, there was still some hope, and now it became disappointment and worry amidst that disappointment. The expressions of the first military academy side were much more relaxed than when Anda had been beaten up, but there was no smug expression on their faces. This was because in their eyes, Officer Zhou, this young man who even the instructor of the mecha department had not been able to easily win, should have won easily. The principal and Professor Chuang, who thought they knew the inside story, who represented the two universities, had a completely different feeling from the rest. Professor Chuang knew that the honor of the number 1 hospital had been preserved, but the heir of the Tai family might not agree to transfer back to the number 1 hospital. Thinking about the dean's instructions, he did not feel happy at all. On the other hand, Principal Tone was looking at the hologram with a smile. He thought to himself, with that young man's gentle appearance and arrogant personality, he should be able to clearly understand that if it wasn't because the training conditions in the H1 area were not as good as the first academies, he would definitely work very hard this year in UA University. In the silent general gymnasium, everyone stared at the black mecha that was trying to stand up again on the screen. While the system had yet to announce the victor, this battle that seemed to have a great disparity in strength was not over yet. Everyone knew that the black mecha was no match for the silver mecha, but seeing that the black mecha showed no signs of surrendering, they could not help but be a little moved. No one knew who started it, but a very rhythmic applause suddenly rang out in the general gymnasium. At first, the sound was very soft, but later on, it attracted more people to join in. The applause gradually grew louder and louder until it was as deafening as a thunderstorm. Then it found the same rhythm, and the sound of the rain became the sound of drums. Pa 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 pa. The sound echoed throughout the general gymnasium, cheering for the black mecha that represented UA University and even the entire university town. In a corner of the spectator stand, the son of the Linhai State representative, Hai Qingzhou, was clapping excitedly, his palms already red. Beside him, the naked Zhang Xiaoming was looking at the hologram seriously, guessing the identity of the person in the black mecha. Although she was also a little worried for the black mecha, she was more calm than anything else. She believed in nonviolence and belonged to the moderate side of the Federation's opposition. However, they were still part of the same system. When she was in S2, she had come into contact with a lot of information about the battles between the Federal Army and the anti-government army. She knew that those mechas had mercilessly torn apart the bodies of those passionate and hot-blooded young anti-government army soldiers. When she saw the mechas, those bloody videos and pictures would appear before her eyes. In her heart, she had an innate disgust towards mecha battles. These emotions only flashed by, and Zhang Xiaoming once again fell into her usual dazed state. Her eyes stared at the hologram, but she didn't know where her thoughts had run off to. Perhaps it was wildflowers, perhaps it was plain porridge, perhaps it was snow, or perhaps it was rain. Who knew? How could this naive and incompetent female spy know that the source of everything she was thinking about right now was actually on the hologram, right in front of her eyes? It was just that it was blocked by the exterior of the mecha. The applause that made people's blood boil like the beating of a drum, and even gave birth to a somewhat tragic feeling, fell into Qinghai's ears. However, it only made the corner of his lips curl up into a mocking curve. He leaned against the wall of the tunnel at the very bottom of the viewing platform, raising his head to look at the hologram on the dome of the comprehensive gymnasium. He thought to himself with slight ridicule, the students were indeed a bunch of idiots with nothing but hot-bloodedness. Even that interesting fellow Su Lu had once displayed such stubbornness at the entrance of the nightclub. The cigarette ash between his fingers fell to the ground. Qinghai closed his eyes, not noticing that the cigarette was about to burn his fingers. He replayed the previous attack from the silver mecha in his mind, confirming that even if the black mecha stood up again with incomparable strength in front of Zhou Yu, it could only fall down once more. The intelligence should be correct. Other than that crown prince, no one else could enter Yue University's H1 area, which had never been made public to the public. The person sitting in the black prototype M mecha should be the target. It looked like that crown prince didn't have much talent in this area, but his temperament was still considered upright. Qinghai opened his eyes, somewhat vexed as he thought to himself. If this crown prince was really the successor of the Tai family, like the intelligence he had received from the organization a few days ago, why was he also so hot-blooded? The hot-bloodedness of such a big shot in his youth was definitely not good news for the anti-government forces he served. Sitting on the sofa, Tai Ziyuan was holding a cup of coffee. He wasn't the least bit surprised by the black mecha's performance. After so many days of interaction, he already knew that Su Lu had this kind of personality, and right now, he was the only one who knew who was inside the black mecha. He lightly shook his head, knowing that even if Su Lu regained control of the mecha, under the next wave of attacks from the silver mecha, he could only hold on for 6 seconds at most. Because the one sitting in the silver mecha was Zhou Yu, the one who the Tai family had been secretly observing for 4 years, the one who was destined to become one of their staff members in the future. Tai Ziyuan raised his coffee cup to toast Su Li's failure, smiling. The intelligent design of the Federation scientists allowed the operator in the mecha to minimize the impact of external impacts. That was why Su Lu had not fainted in the black mecha's cockpit. But right now, he felt terrible. He swallowed a few mouthfuls of saliva to stop himself from vomiting, and his vision finally cleared. He smiled wryly, subconsciously wiping his lips, and then his hands began to operate the mecha again, trying to get the black mecha to stand up. The lovelorn youth wanted to use a random battle, or perhaps be abused, to vent the frustration in his heart that he had no one to talk to. He had already predicted the outcome of failure, and had even vaguely looked forward to being beaten up. However, when he actually began to fail, he found himself like a child in front of that silver mecha, unable to fight back at all. Su Lu subconsciously felt resentful. This was due to his personality. Having grown up alone, he possessed the tenacity, optimism, and unwillingness to admit defeat unique to Donglin people. He had never been used to admitting defeat without trying, and was even more unaccustomed to the slightly bitter feeling of defeat in his heart right now. Losing to an outstanding military cadet from the 1st Military Academy was something very easy for Su Lu to accept, but he could not accept that he had the thought of admitting defeat after that attack. In non-combat mode, The front end of the mecha's mechanical arms were all fitted with human-like alloy knuckles. When clasped together, they formed a powerful fist. The black mecha's alloy fist had actually been damaged quite severely in the earlier battle when it had knocked down the blue-black mecha. It was this damaged alloy fist that had propped up the floor, supporting the black mecha's balance and allowing it to stand up again. Sulu had done this very naturally, but when it was displayed on the screen, it caused even more enthusiastic applause to ring out in the comprehensive museum. In reality, Sulu had no idea how much applause was ringing out for him. He didn't even know that there were people watching this battle. He did not need applause for anything he did. The antique level simulation system in the mecha's cockpit suddenly attracted Su Li's gaze. "You're very strong. I still want to learn from you." He opened the internal comms of the combat system and spoke very sincerely to that extremely elegant silver mecha pilot. Inside the silver mecha, the expressionless Zhou Yu finally showed a stunned expression. He glanced reflexively at his communicator and heard the other's sincerity and honesty. A trace of doubt flashed across that heroic face. But it was not because of the attitude the other was displaying right now, but because of the details he had captured from the data analysis in the previous battle. In everyone's eyes, the black mecha had already been utterly defeated in that short period of time. Inside the silver mecha, only Zhou Yu, the young prodigy of machine control, had keenly picked up on a trace of strangeness. At this moment, he had already confirmed that the person operating the black mecha was much slower than him in terms of hand speed and finesse and control. However, the problem was that the black mecha's reaction speed every time it dodged was always a hair faster than he had calculated. Being faster by a hair did not seem to be an important matter, but in the lightning-quick battle between mecha, it was extremely important. Although the black mecha's reaction speed was not fully displayed because it was not at a superb level of control, the problems in the data allowed Zhou Yu to confirm that the other's reaction speed was abnormal, even much faster than his own. He could not understand how the other had done this. Could it be that there really was such a thing as intuition in legends? In the silver mecha, after a moment of silence, Zhou Yu said seriously to the mysterious person in the black mecha who had stood up again, "Learn from each other, please." Chapter 95. The other had said please, so Sulu very naturally followed up with, "Please, wait a moment." It had to be said that even the same type of soup could produce a different taste of cabbage. This was the problem of the ingredients. The students of the First Military Academy were all very proud people, but the temperament this pride displayed was completely different. Piloting the blue and black mecha, Ndakwe appeared frivolous and manic, while Zhou Yu appeared rather elegant. Hearing the voice in his ear, Zhou Yu smiled faintly. Looking at the black mecha that was barely maintaining its balance on the monitor screen, he said softly, "Okay." He did not know what the person in the black mecha wanted him to wait for. Perhaps it was to buy some time to rest, or perhaps it was to think of a way to defeat him. Absolute confidence allowed Zhou Yu to calmly and unhurriedly display the demeanor of a student of the First Military Academy. Meanwhile, inside the black mecha, Sulu really did seem to be resting. The mecha stood blankly against the wall for a long time, not making any movements at all. The long period of silence and the pause of the battle, as well as the strange atmosphere in the combat room, was displayed on the large screen of the multi-purpose gymnasium. Finally, it was noticed by those students who had been clapping incessantly in the multi-purpose gymnasium, holding their breaths and cheering for the black mecha. The applause gradually died down, returning to an incomparable silence. Everyone stared in surprise at the two motionless mecha on the screen, not knowing what had happened. Sure Qinghai was rubbing his scalded fingers together in boredom, his delicate eyebrows furrowed beautifully. Suddenly, his attention was drawn by the strange movements in his surroundings. He glanced curiously at the screen, and after a moment of silent observation, he guessed a bit about the exchange between the two mecha operators in the combat room. He could not help but laugh, thinking that at this moment, Zhou Yu would definitely give the other as much tolerance as possible to show his own demeanor. Sure enough, People from the first military academy were all so cocky. But what was that black mecha trying to do? The difference in strength was too great. Even if he continued to ponder in silence, the black mecha would not be able to defeat the silver mecha controlled by Zhou Yu in such a short amount of time. Unless that young master in the black mecha suddenly exploded with a mini-universe. In a small villa not too far away from the General Training Center, Tai Ziwan was also holding a cup of coffee as he watched the silent battle between the two mecha on the screen with great interest. One of the two combatants was a friend he did not know about, while the other was his future subordinate. He was very clear about the strength of both parties and their personalities. He was all smiles as he prepared to watch Su Le fall and get back up, and then fall again. It was just like those hot-blooded space dramas that last from Department 23 had acted out. At this moment, the black mecha that had been silent for a long time suddenly moved. Shi Qinghai narrowed his eyes. The people in the multi-purpose museum watched nervously. Tai Ziwan, who was in the small villa, smiled and drank his coffee. He bent his left thumb on the armrest and counted softly in his heart. 1, only 6 seconds. Tai Ziwan believed in his judgment. Sula could only hold on for 6 seconds. In the second, the black mecha and the silver mecha collided violently once again. However, this time, there was no clear and heavy sound of metal clashing. This was because in that split second where the naked eye could not see, the two damaged mechanical arms of the black mecha suddenly moved at a strange angle to seal the front of the silver mecha. The silver mecha tore through the air like a blade. The right arm that was aiming straight for the black mecha's cockpit was blocked by the two damaged mechanical arms of the black mecha, which were even faintly emitting sparks. To be more precise, it was not a block, but a block. The angle between the two mechanical arms was particularly strange. They were radially outwards and just so happened to sandwich the silver mecha's mechanical arms in between. The silver mecha's attack caused the armor of the two mecha's mechanical arms to rub against each other incessantly, making a heart-palpitating, sizzling sound. The tremendous force of impact was all concentrated in this area of close contact, causing the two mecha to tremble at the same time. They were sent flying a distance of more than 10 centimeters from the metal floor. Inside the silver mecha, Zhou Yu was rather surprised by the opponent's control precision and speed, but he did not find it particularly strange. This was because he had already noticed earlier that the opponent had a very strange reaction speed. His control should not have been so poor in the first place. The black mecha's clumsy movements were successfully captured in that split second. It no longer had to face the silver mecha's high-speed operation and nimble mecha footwork, thus concealing its own strengths to the greatest extent. This seemed simple, but in reality, it was extremely difficult. This was because the metal-powered nature of the mecha meant that the operator was destined to be unable to command the slightest movements of the mecha, as if it were their own body. In mecha battle operations, there had never been such standard movements that resembled human combat. The black mecha retreated, using both arms to block. It was completely like a human who had trained in a self-cultivation hall for countless years, not like a cold and emotionless machine at all. The students who were nervously watching the screen in the comprehensive gymnasium did not understand the difficulty hidden behind this simple movement of the black mecha. They only found that the black mecha, which had been on the verge of collapse, had not only stood up, but had also successfully blocked the silver mecha's attack for the first time. This fact allowed them to see a sliver of hope for Li Hua University's victory, and they could not help but erupt into a burst of enthusiastic cheers. However, Zhou Yu understood. Those students from the First Academy's mecha department understood. Shi Qinghai and Tai Ziwan also understood. They could not help but feel somewhat surprised. Zhou Yu did not know how the person in the black mecha had been able to make a cold and emotionless machine complete that movement so smoothly like a human. Similarly, he did not know how the opponent could have a reaction speed faster than his own. But despite his surprise, this ace student of the First Military Academy did not feel a trace of worry in his heart. Calmly watching the various data feeds on the monitor screen, His eyes even flashed with a hint of a smile. The 4th second. Another change. The two mecha, which had been locked in a stalemate, suddenly shook violently for a moment. The arm of the silver mecha, which had been firmly blocked by the black mecha, once again reached forward. The alloy fist, gleaming with a cold light, was aimed directly at the most fatal part of the mecha, the cockpit. Of course, in this sort of system-monitored battle, it was impossible to allow true death to occur between the mecha. However, if the silver mecha could really use some kind of power to strike the cockpit, the system would naturally judge the silver mecha as the victor. This was the source of Zhou Yu's calm confidence. Whether the black mecha's strange block had been done subconsciously or if it really had some strange control method, Zhou Yu did not care. The mechanical arms of the two mecha were entangled. The silver mecha had lost its high-speed mobility and seemed to be at a disadvantage, but in reality, this battle was completely a test of both parties' micro-operations in a small space, as well as the power of their own mecha's power system. In these two aspects, Zhou Yu was very confident. The black mecha was not a match for him. When it came to micro-operations, Zhou Yu's standard was far beyond that of the average person. Meanwhile, the silver mecha was an enhanced version of the M37, so its own power output was much higher than the M prototype. Following the full output of the Jingnong type's high-power batteries, the back of the silver mecha emitted an incomparably familiar, incomparably intimate hum. The powerful power output of the M37 allowed the silver mecha to advance once again, seemingly unstoppable. In particular, Zhou Yu's right hand continued to input commands on the touchscreen, causing the silver mecha's mechanical arms to vibrate rapidly in the smallest possible range within 0.01 seconds, colliding endlessly with the black mecha's two mechanical arms. Knock, knock, knock. Like a woodpecker pecking endlessly at a sturdy tree, gradually loosening the tree, or like the hand of an ancient giant, continuously striking at the crevices in the rock, causing the crevices in the rock to grow larger and larger. And mecha's alloy mechanical arms would not tire, but under this sort of extremely small range of vibrations, there was no time to reset them. The black mecha could only watch as the crevice in front of it grew larger and larger, while the silver mecha's mechanical arms drew closer and closer, faster and faster. It had to be admitted that the mecha combat ability of the ace students of the 1st Military Academy's mecha department was already at a very abnormal level. The 6th second. Tai Ziyuan's coffee cup paused by his lips. All 5 fingers on the sofa were already curled, his brow furrowed as he stared intently at the screen. That black mecha was on the verge of defeat, subconsciously feeling that something strange was about to happen. Zhou Yu also felt it, because the opponent's black mecha had not reacted at all in these 2 seconds, as if it had already lost all confidence. All it could do was wait to be hit, and then be judged as a failure by the system. However, Zhou Yu was sure that the person in the black mecha was not someone who would admit defeat so easily. An ominous feeling appeared in Zhou Yu's mind. His expression was calm, but his fingers began to move rapidly across the screen, adjusting the M37's power output to instant strike. At the same time, he made the lower half of the mecha's mechanical legs begin to bend slightly to change into forward mode. The sound of electrical current and the sound of metal components coming together rang out. In the battle room, the trembling bodies of the two giant mecha seemed to freeze at the same time. The silver mecha's mechanical legs began to crouch, about to change into forward mode. Zhou Yu decided not to wait for that ominous possibility. He wanted to use this risky method to obtain more power output and ground grip in order to succeed in one hit. However, the black mecha, which had been silent all this while, seemed to have been waiting for this very moment. When the lower half of the silver mecha, area 74C, shifted slightly to the back due to the mode change, the black mecha moved. Its thick mechanical legs moved, moving clumsily but decisively, becoming a black arc in the air. At a speed impossible to follow with the naked eye, at a precise 30-degree angle, it slashed viciously towards area 74C of the lower half of the silver mecha. This was a scene that should never appear in a mecha battle. This was definitely a movement example that had never appeared in any mecha tutorial. The Federation's M-Series mecha were all Form 2 mecha. The heavy mechanical legs were mainly used to support the heavy load of the mecha itself, but they could also be changed into forward mode. Through the reassembly of the metal components, the mecha could move swiftly across the plains at a speed of more than 100 kilometers per hour. If required during wartime, tracks could also be temporarily installed to allow the mecha to smoothly cross those complicated swamps. All in all, in the Federation's mecha design and usage philosophy, the mecha's pair of heavy mechanical legs played a rather important role. However, this role was mainly reflected in the aspects of structure and movement. In battle, the mecha's balance was even more important. Only by maintaining the mecha's balance could the mecha's three major systems be guaranteed a stable reference and reaction platform. Because the mecha's requirement for this aspect were too high, whether in design or usage, the people of the Federation had always only installed the weapon systems on the upper half of the mecha. Very few people would have thought that those heavy and clumsy moving mechanical legs could actually also be used as offensive weapons. In the countless thousands of years of history, there must have been scientists or those strong pilots who had come from training halls who had considered whether the mechanical legs could play an important role in mecha battle. However, countless experiments and calculations had long proven that if the stability of the mecha was to be guaranteed, the flexibility of the mechanical legs would have to be sacrificed. After all, a mecha was a machine. No matter how nimble a machine was, it still did not have the body of a human. It could not be like those special forces soldiers or training masters who could leap through the forest and kick like a human. Perhaps some beginners would enthusiastically attempt this, but what awaited them would definitely be complete failure. This was because a mecha that could not even maintain the most basic stability and balance, no matter how fancy it was to raise its legs, could only be blown to the ground by a gust of wind. In true mecha special operations, it was naturally possible to use the mechanical legs to perform some actions that one would never normally do. However, that would only be done when one was already cornered into a desperate situation, which was why one would use such an extremely risky method. The professors of the three major military academies and the Westwoods Military Academy's mecha faculty had long come to the conclusion that to control a mecha, as if it was one's own body, the mecha pilot would need to have the computing speed and control precision of a computer. A high-grade central control computer might be able to complete these actions, but the computer itself would not be able to possess the natural reaction and judgment abilities of a human. Thus, the federal military's mecha teaching materials had never contained content on this aspect. This was because this was an offensive method that did not pay for itself. This was an offensive method that required countless failures before it could succeed once. In other words, this was a very stupid offensive method. Joyu had seen this type of mecha leg attack before. In the first military academy's mecha faculty, there was a junior who was often whimsical but incredibly stubborn. That junior had once spent half a year's time attempting to make a mecha able to use the mechanical legs to launch an attack off the ground, while at the same time maintaining a quick response method under the opponent's counterattack. However, half a year later, that whimsical and incredibly stubborn junior had finally given up in resentment. Although even Joyu admired that junior's talent, the consensus formed over countless years by the Human Federation was not something that just anyone could overturn. Thus, when Joyu saw that black silhouette of a mechanical leg cleaving towards him with extreme precision and power from the monitor screen, and when the black mecha's main body still maintained its stability, its two arms blocking the silver mechanical arms still in place, Joyu actually subconsciously paused for a tenth of a second, his pupils constricting abruptly. How had the opponent done it? Was it because half of the black mecha's body was leaning against the wall of the combat room? Or was it just a coincidence? Regardless of which it was, Joyu would not actually feel panicked. This was because in countless mecha battles, there would always be some wondrous situations that would occur. And the next time, perhaps that pilot would not be able to use the same effect again. Zhou himself had once unconsciously completed a beautiful roundhouse kick with his silver M37 during a mecha piloting experiment. At that time, he had been immensely excited. However, when he tried to repeat the process in the days after that, he found that out of a total of 14 experiments, he had only succeeded twice. Such a low success rate could not be used in actual combat at all. The cautious Zhou Yu had since then tossed this matter to the back of his mind. This was because he knew that with the controllability of all the pilots in the Federation, they would not be able to make an attack from the lower half of a mecha become an effective method. Thus, Zhou Yu believed that the black mecha had only suddenly erupted in a desperate situation and had been lucky enough to execute this kick, just like his own beautiful roundhouse kick all those years ago. What truly made Zhou Yu feel immense pressure was the black mecha's reaction speed and calmness. The opponent seemed to have predicted all the developments of the battle from the very first second, knowing that the two mecha would definitely be in a stalemate. Meanwhile, the silver M37 would rely on its greater power to gain an irreversible advantage, while Zhou Yu himself would switch his mechanical legs to forward mode at the last moment to deliver the final blow. The black mecha's reaction was too miraculous. In that instant when the silver mecha had switch mode, it had found a loophole in the armor of Area 74C and had immediately attacked that area. The opponent had been silent all this time. Could it be that it had been waiting for this moment? If that was true, this sort of forbearance, this sort of calmness, this sort of observation, and even this sort of gambling style of attack would make Zhou Yu feel an unprecedented pressure. A chill flashed through Zhou Yu's heart, but he did not have time to think further. His narrowed eyes flashed, and the strength of an ace pilot burst forth in that instant. His fingers brushed past the touchscreen so quickly that the naked eye could not see them clearly. His left mechanical arm, which had been left empty all this time due to his elegance, suddenly shot forward. In a close-range battle between mecha without the firepower system, it was actually more like a primitive fight. The only things that were competing were brute force and speed. In other words, the power of the mecha and the pilot's controllability. At this moment, the black mecha's storm-like kick attack surprised Zhou Yu greatly. He needed to compete in speed with the opponent. As long as he could hit the opponent's cockpit faster than the opponent by just a hair, then he would still be the victor in this battle. The 6th second was finally over. Unsurprisingly, this kick of the black mecha's that no one had expected was like a poplar tree that had been uprooted by a strong gust of wind, or like a giant white wave that had struck the dam of Linhai province and then spat it out again. It accurately and heavily struck the lower half of the silver mecha's body, hitting Area 74C. With a loud crack, the clumsy black alloy mechanical legs struck the area where the silver mecha had temporarily lost its defensive capabilities, leaving a shocking wound. Electrical sparks lit up the combat room. On the lower half of the silver mecha's body, countless metal wires and pipes were tragically broken. At the same time, the silver mecha's pair of mechanical arms had successfully broken through the black mecha's defenses, striking viciously at the black mecha's abdomen where the cockpit was located. With a series of crackling sounds, the translucent cockpit door was severely deformed, and web-like cracks began to extend endlessly. White smoke began to fill the combat room, obscuring all vision. After a moment of silence, the system's electronic voice rang out once more. It was a very straightforward and simple judgment. Same. The combat room fell into a strange silence. The two heavily damaged mecha had already left combat mode, facing each other silently. After the silver mecha's left mechanical leg had suffered that powerful blow, its structural system had been completely destroyed. The entire body of the mecha was already half-tilted, and it had lost all ability to move. A moment later, the silver mecha's cockpit door opened. Zhou Yu stared blankly at the thick smoke in front of him, as if he wanted to see the black mecha that was so close to him clearly. The black mecha's cockpit door had already cracked open inch by inch. However, the smoke-filled room made it impossible to see the pilot's true appearance on the other side of the smoke. Zhou Yu frowned slightly. In combat mode, The maximum attack power output was limited, especially the attack aimed at the cockpit. Why had the opponent's cockpit door been completely shattered? He did not know if the other person was fine. He was somewhat worried, but he did not know that the Black Mecha's cockpit door was a temporary backup that had been installed today. "Are you okay?" shouted Zhou Yu towards the other side of the smoke. After a long time, a few coughs came from the other side of the smoke, and a voice rang out. "You're really strong. I thought that kick would hit you. You shouldn't have been able to hit me in time." Zhou Yu could hear the sincerity in the other's voice, and could not help but smile slightly. However, his smile was somewhat bitter. He had confirmed that the other was just a beginner, but seemed to have some kind of talent. He looked at the gradually dissipating smoke, frowning as he asked, "You're a student of Yua University? How did you do that kick just now? Do you want to come to our academy to learn some basic knowledge?" Zhou Yu had only said this subconsciously, but then he smiled and shook his head, saying, "Today, you've already become the hero of Yua University. I think that Principal Tsong will not let a talent like you leave." Their previous conversation and their current shouts through the smoke were all limited to the combat room. The countless people in the comprehensive hall could not hear them at all. The voice on the other side of the smoke suddenly became confused. "What hero? You don't know?" Zhou Yu looked at the gradually dissipating smoke in puzzlement. The air system in the combat room was operating at full capacity, and the smoke instantly thinned by a lot. The alloy ceiling in the sky slowly opened, and ear-splitting cheers could be heard from below. Sitting in the Black Mecha, Su Lu watched all this in a daze. Suddenly, he cried out, and at the same time, the Black Mecha also began to move rapidly. As the smoke gradually dissipated, Zhou Yu heard the sound of electric current coming from the other side, and was even more puzzled. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the other's broken cabin door, wanted to see clearly what this strange fellow looked like. But all he saw was a pair of heavily damaged alloy fists firmly blocking the cabin door. The comprehensive hall was already filled with thunderous cheers. The students of Yua University and the other academies in the university town were all in a state of excitement. They never would have thought that the seemingly dying Black Mecha would not only stubbornly stand up, but even fight to a draw with the ace student of the first military academy in the end. On the rostrum, Principal Tsong, the professors and lecturers of Yua University were all very gratified. Even the leader of the first military academy, Professor Tsong, was very happy. A draw was the best result. At least they did not have to offend that young man. The ceiling of the combat room slowly opened, and the smoke gradually dispersed. Countless gazes were cast in that direction. Countless people wanted to know which department of Yua University student was sitting in the mysterious Black Mecha. No matter what kind of person this student was in the past, after today, he would definitely become a legendary figure that countless students would never forget. Principal Tsong smiled as he looked in that direction, thinking that tonight was the Double Moon Festival Ball, and the successor of the Tai family had chosen such an appearance a few hours in advance. Perhaps the heavens had arranged it better. However, what surprised everyone was that when the smoke dispersed, they only saw a heavily damaged silver mecha and a Black Mecha using its alloy fist to block the cracked cabin door, turning its body around and running towards the gradually opening door at the back of the combat room. No one could clearly see who was inside the Black Mecha. Even when the screen was zoomed into the nearest, there was still no way to see who was inside. This scene was engraved in the memories of many people because after a soul-stirring mecha battle drill, they had seen the Black M prototype mecha they had hailed as a hero clutching its abdomen and limping away like a shameless thief, fleeing in an incomparably wretched and terrified manner. Because of this scene, the comprehensive gymnasium instantly fell into an incomparable silence. Beside the passageway, Shi Qinghai opened his mouth wide as he looked at the back of the mecha that was running away like a dog. He suddenly cursed and hurriedly blew on his fingers that had been burned by the cigarette, but on the sofa of the small villa, Tai Ziwan stared blankly at the screen, thinking that if the Black Mecha were to act, it would definitely become a Nebula Award winner. This scene of running away while holding its stomach was so much like a pitiful person who had eaten something bad. Thinking of this, as someone of noble status, he could not help but spit out a mouthful of coffee and almost laughed out loud in a manner that did not match his status. Chapter 96. Wiping off the coffee stains on his body with a snow-white handkerchief, Taiziwan shook his head with a self-deprecating smile. He thought to himself, "How many years has it been since I last laughed so happily?" He stood up from the sofa and said to Butler Jean beside him, "Change the records for today. Just say that I was studying in Area H1. Butler Jean lowered his head slightly, immediately understanding the young master's intentions. After a short pause, he said, "Young master, since Sulu has access to the chip in Area H1, I believe that his relationship with Professor Jean is definitely not as simple as what is shown in UA University's records. Professor Jean couldn't have changed the central control computer program in Area H1 so casually. It was only because he happened to meet a soldier in the recruit camp. Shouldn't we tell Madam about this?" For countless nights, other than Butler Jean, no one else knew that the heir of the Tai family was studying in Area H1 every night. He was not alone, but had a companion. No one knew that Sulu could also enter Area H1. Butler Jean was slightly worried when he saw the final attack of the Black Mecha on the screen today, so he once again suggested this to Taiziwan. Taiziwan thought for a moment and shook his head. Apart from matters such as his coming-of-age ceremony, Butler Jean would definitely not mention any details related to his life to anyone without his permission, not even his mother. Taiziwan trusted his own judgment regarding this interesting fellow, Sulu. It was just a coincidence that they met, and there was no hidden agenda. Don't think too much about it. Life lasts for decades. There are bound to be some unexpected events to make things more interesting, Taiziwan said as a long-lost smile appeared on his slightly pale and thin face. Thinking back to all the little details he had shared with Sulu since they met, he was already sure that the other was a trustworthy person. "Yes, then I'll go deal with the records right away." Butler Jean lowered his head slightly. He was actually willing to see the young master, who was destined to be unable to enjoy the normal life of most Federation citizens, be able to enjoy luxuries such as friendship. "I should be drenched in sweat by now. I should have taken a shower, so I need to change my clothes." Taiziwan tossed the white handkerchief in his hand onto the table and said with a smile, "I'm sure Principal Tsone will be coming over to discuss tonight's dance with me. Perhaps he also wants to confirm that the Black Mecha that just walked away with its belly full is me." In the quiet and deep room on the right side of the H1 area, the sound of metal machinery suddenly rang out. The heavy alloy wall at the furthest end of the room had just closed. Before the data cable and power cable could be reconnected to the Black Mech's body, the Mech's two deformed alloy fists that had been blocking its abdomen suddenly pulled apart. The pale-faced Sulu appeared in the severely damaged cockpit like a frightened rat. With the fastest speed he could muster, he took off the almost antique simulation operating system on his body. Wiping away the cold sweat on his forehead, he resisted the hunger in his stomach and once again called upon the mysterious power in his body. With a tremble of his legs, he jumped down from the Black Mech that was several meters tall like an ape. He turned into a cloud of dust and rushed to the back of the terminal display at the door. After strenuously stacking the simulation operating system and the small tool into his backpack, Sulu put on his backpack. He did not forget to enter the command for full cleaning on the terminal. Following the input of the command, the self-cleaning equipment came out from all around the H1 area with a beeping sound. Countless dust and spray equipment came out from the ceiling and began to clean the entire room, especially the platform where the Black Mech was. It was cleaned repeatedly. Presumably, it would not be long before all the fingerprints that Sulu had left behind in the Mech's cockpit and this room were wiped clean. Wiping away the beads of sweat on his forehead again, Sulu silently and steadily put on his backpack. He walked out of the room and came to the tightly shut alloy door. After the chip's scan and the command input were complete, he stood in the corridor between the two doors. Through the gap of the outermost door, he cautiously confirmed that there were no diligent students in the H area outside for the time being. Only then did he leave the H1 area in a flash. Using his hat to cover his face, Sulu lowered his head and walked quickly through the quiet H area of the library. It had to be said that his luck was pretty good. It was already 10:30 in the morning. Usually, there would already be countless excellent students from UA University diligently studying in the H area of the library. They would definitely notice that a student had walked out of the strange H1 area that no one had ever entered before. However, the first military academy was visiting today. Most of the people were watching that soul-stirring mecha battle in the comprehensive library. Moreover, tonight was the Double Moon Festival Ball. No matter how nerdy a student was, they would all try their best to tidy themselves up, praying that they would be able to dance a song with the girl they loved that night. Under the witness of those pairs of moons, they would reap a sweet romance. Jogging out of the H area of the library, he passed through the quiet forest. After confirming that no one had discovered that he had come out of the H1 area, Sulu finally relaxed. He allowed a long, stuffy breath and slowed down his walking speed. At this time, he had both hands in his trouser pockets and a backpack on his back. He looked like a very normal student. It was not until he had walked for a long time that he met a few students who were excitedly discussing something, but no one had noticed him. Walking along the grassy banks of the Rose River, fine snowflakes gradually drifted down from the sky, landing on the withered yellow grass. Sulu took off his hat and rubbed his slightly wet, messy black hair. Uneasily, he took out his mobile phone to take a look. Only then did he find that it was already 11 o'clock. His lips could not help but reveal a self-deprecating smile. He thought to himself that he was indeed very muddle-headed, actually sleeping for quite a few hours in the mecha. When he had been fighting with those two mecha just now, he had stupidly thought that it was still 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. Thinking back to that earlier scene, especially after the opening of the battle room's dome and the countless cheers and gazes in that instant, Suli's heart could not help but thump wildly. At this time, he had already determined that the H1 area was not a simple place. Furthermore, he had accidentally engaged in a battle with the first military academy's mecha pilots, officers, and students, and had fallen into the eyes of so many people. He could not help but feel shocked and terrified. Having escaped from Eastwood District for a year, Sulu would sometimes subconsciously forget his identity as a fugitive and thus appear less cautious. But today, he had actually operated a mecha in front of so many people, and in the end, he had even used the antique simulation system to call on that strange power within his body, although that strange power no longer manifested itself in the typical form of trembling. Sulu was still very worried. Would the Black Mecha's final attack alert some aspect of the Federation? A faint sense of regret welled up in his heart. Stepping on the frozen grass and twigs, he walked towards the iron gates of Pear Garden. Perhaps it was the untimely death of a young man's first love, or perhaps it was the bitter experience of these past few days that had caused him to be so muddle-headed that he had made such a mistake. Kacha, Kacha, as he walked forward, the regret in his heart grew fainter and fainter. Since it had already become an established fact, there was no point in regretting it anymore. Sulu had always been a straightforward and efficient person. He patted his cheeks and exhaled a mouthful of white mist. Lowering his head, he continued to walk forward, thinking in his heart that if someone really came to investigate the Black Mecha, he would just change his identity and leave Pear Garden University, going somewhere else to live a different life. It was just that he felt a little reluctant to leave. A little reluctant to leave this Pear Garden University's snow-like pear blossoms. Snow-like pear blossoms as pure and amiable as pear blossoms, but sometimes as cold and unpredictable as snow. That girl, that rogue official friend of Shi Qinghai's, and that frail rich kid who ate supper with him every night. Suli's hurried footsteps slowed down, and the two knife-like eyebrows under his cap gradually smoothed out. In the end, he stood by the Rose River and found that his current state of mind was already different from when he had just escaped from Donglin. He had something to worry about. Things like love and friendship were burdens, but they were burdens that he liked very much. Looking at the thin ice floating on the river and the faint mist, Su Li's eyes narrowed slightly, as if he was smiling. He made up his mind. He was not in a hurry to leave, but wanted to see if there would be any problems with today's scene. If no one could find out that the person in the black mecha was him, then why should he leave? Right at this moment, the faint melody of a violin rang out. Sulu was slightly startled. He fished out his phone from his pocket and put it to his ear. Then, he heard Shi Qinghai's lazy but exceptionally charming voice. "Where are you? I didn't see you in the general library, and I couldn't find you in the gatehouse at this time either. I'm studying by the river." Su Li's voice was slightly hoarse because of his nervousness. "Studying my ass. I ordered 2 sets of clothes from CU for tonight's ball. Come over quickly, I'll go get them for you." Sula laughed, knowing that the other was worried that a dull fellow like him would not understand the rules of the ball. He couldn't help but feel a trace of warmth and said, "Thank you. Thank my ass. You're someone with an inheritance, so the money is yours." Sulu was helpless. He had originally wanted to say that he already had clothes, but then he remembered that those clothes were bought by Zhang Xiaoming, and he couldn't help but feel a little sour in his heart. Besides, he really didn't dare to stay on campus at this time, so he said, "I'll be right there." "No, I have something urgent to attend to right now." On the other end of the line, Shi Qinghai's voice suddenly turned calm. "You go by yourself first. I'll come look for you in a bit." Sulu put his phone back into his pocket and pulled his cap down even lower, hiding his slightly furrowed brows. He had heard the sudden change in Shi Qinghai's voice and felt that the other seemed to have something on his mind, but he didn't know what it was. Shi Qinghai had always been a mysterious person. Perhaps it was because of his profession. Sulu walked towards the iron gates of Pear Blossom Garden worriedly. Along the way, he saw many students who had just walked out of the general library. These students were not only from Pear Blossom University. There were also many students wearing the uniforms of other schools in the university city. What was similar was that these students all had traces of excitement on their faces, their eyes shining with pride and excitement. The sounds of discussion were endless, ringing out between the small path in the woods and the teaching buildings in the early winter. These students were all discussing the 2 previous mecha battle drills, especially the final battle between the black mecha and the silver M37. A mysterious student pilot had appeared in Pear Blossom University, operating an M prototype mecha, and actually being able to fight to a draw with an A student of the 1st Military Academy who was operating an M37 mecha. Without question, this made all the students in the university city feel proud and honored. They discussed excitedly, some students even unable to resist swaying their bodies and imitating the black mecha's final kick. Although they all knew that the silver mecha's control level seemed to be higher, and that the final blow to the abdomen had also been exceptionally domineering, their attention was still only on the black mecha. Wearing his cap, Sulu walked briskly past these students. Although he didn't want to deliberately listen, those terms like black mecha still kept pouring into his ears. The more he listened, the more complicated his feelings became. Knowing that the silver mecha he had fought with in the end was indeed an ace student of the 1st Military Academy, he couldn't help but feel somewhat happy. However, when he saw those students laughing loudly while imitating the black mecha clutching its stomach and running away, he couldn't help but feel a little awkward. At that time, he had only been in a hurry to cover his face and run away. So how could he have cared about the so-called demeanor and image of a pilot? Returning to his own concierge bedroom, Sulu could finally relax completely. He gulped down a large vat of cold water to replenish the water he had lost earlier and quench the terrifying hunger in his stomach. Carrying his backpack into the bathroom, he carefully removed the mirror. The tiles behind the mirror had basically been hollowed out by him, enough to fit a backpack inside. After hiding the backpack, Sulu pondered for a moment, then pried up another tile underneath. He took out the stun baton he had named Flying Dagger and put on his body. He didn't know what would happen in the next few days, so it was better to be careful. Last time, when he met Hook and the others outside the clubhouse, if he had had his stun baton with him, he wouldn't have been so helpless under the cold muzzle of that gun and could only take the risk of fighting with his body. Before leaving the room, He subconsciously turned on the hologram on the wall. The constantly flashing and rolling post titles on the campus network appeared on the hologram and reflected in his eyes. His expression became extremely rich, and his body also froze in place. Black Mecca, where are you? We're calling for you. General Library's live post, The Black Mecca's Great Reversal. Why is the Mecca so black? It's the same as being a dark horse. What are the legends of UA University trying to hide behind the scenes? A proud academy retreats in defeat. Why are hidden geniuses always among the common folk? These are the few posts that were pinned to the top, and the scrolling post list below was basically dominated by the scene in the General Library today. In the Capitol Ring, where information was incomparably advanced, the Mecca duel in the General Library was continuously being broadcasted live on the campus network, attracting the attention of countless people. Especially after the mysterious disappearance of the Black Mecca at the end, countless people began to guess the Black Mecca's true identity amidst their cheers, and countless people launched activities to search for the Black Mecca. How long had it been? And it had already caused such a huge commotion. Sulu was lost in thought as he stared at the words on the hologram in astonishment. When the vault had opened earlier, he had already known that the situation of the Mecca duel had fallen into the eyes of countless people. Earlier on, he had also seen many students discussing excitedly, but he really hadn't expected that a mere Mecca duel drill would be able to excite the students of the entire university town to this extent. Sulu looked at the hologram and scratched his head, somewhat baffled. His eyes narrowed out of habit, and he raised his arm to click on one of the links to a high-definition video. In an extremely short amount of time, the image on the hologram was transferred to the Federation's largest video website. Tomato, looking at that clumsy Black Mecca's movements on the screen, looking at that incomparably swift silver stream of light, Su Li's eyes slowly widened, and he stared without stopping for a moment. When he thought of how countless people had been like him earlier, staring at that incomparably large hologram in the General Library while he himself was within the hologram, his mood became somewhat strange. On the screen, the Black Mecca fell, stood up, and then 6 seconds passed in a flash. Under the impossible circumstances, the Black Mecca executed that kick. During the transition of movement mode, in an extremely short amount of time, the 74C armor plate on the lower half of the M37 Mecca would show problems. Sulu watched every image, and his mood gradually calmed down. He studied harder than anyone else, memorizing all the M-Series mecha blueprints he could find in UA University. Those memorized data, mixed together with the techniques Uncle Phone you had imperceptibly taught him back in the Eastwood region, gave him a natural intuitive judgment of mecha, which was why he could accurately grasp the fleeting opportunity. This really could only be attributed to intuition, and had nothing to do with the strange power in his body or the information transmission channel. It was just that this sort of intuition could only be attributed to a sea of data and many years of practice, and only then could one have a natural affinity with mechanical components. To know where the only possible loophole of the silver mecha was, one also needed to have the ability to grasp this loophole. Suli's control level was still far from being a match for the A students of the 1st Military Academy, but he had an ability that they definitely could not have, and that was the trembling of his body. The antique control system that had been phased out by the Federation many years ago, combined with the powerful physical control ability in his body, could allow the mecha to perform actions that would never be possible under normal circumstances. 30 degrees, it could only be 30 degrees. Sulu watched the image quietly, and a happy smile appeared on his face. He thought of the kick that the fat captain of the Ancient Bell had sent towards him. That kick of the Black Mech on the screen already looked like Captain Tion's kick, Ling Lai's kick. Sulu took a deep breath, and an indescribable feeling began to fill his chest. Perhaps it was confidence, or perhaps it was joy, or something else. But after all, he was just a youth. Every victory and improvement in life would make him happy, even if today's happiness was extremely risky and muddled. He vaguely understood the true use of the power in his body, and also understood how the uncle was able to calmly face an entire team of special mecha from the Federation. In this world, only the uncle and him understood that the human body was the first line of machines, and the mecha was just an extension of this machine. Only the uncle and him could use the powerful power in their bodies, either through methods that have been phased out by the Federation, or through methods as mysterious as the uncle, using the human body to directly control the mecha. Chapter 97. Sulu should have been proud, but he was not. The excitement he should have felt was not as strong as people thought. He looked at the last image of the black mech leaving in a sorry state on the screen and just smiled happily. His interest was still in mech repair. Piloting a mech was exhilarating, but it was not his goal in life. The war between the Federation and the Empire had subsided for more than 10 years. In an era where peace was gradually becoming a habit, Sulu did not plan to enlist in military. Naturally, he did not think that becoming a mech pilot was his future choice. Perhaps it was because of what happened to Uncle Boss and his forced exile, as well as the privileged class like the Zhou siblings, that Sulu did not have much of a good impression and trust to the Federation government. In comparison, he actually had a much better impression of the anti-government faction led by Senator Macklin. Of course, if the Empire once again brazenly invaded the Federation, Sulu would not run far away just because of his dislike of the government. He would definitely do his duty as a citizen of the Federation. In just a moment, Sulu thought of his life many years in the future from the black mech on the screen. This kind of absent-mindedness rarely happened to him, except when he was doing mech repair work. Suddenly, an extremely loud rumbling sound came from his stomach. Sulu looked down with a bitter expression, almost fainting from the strong sense of hunger. The set of strange movements and the mysterious power in his body that Uncle Feng Yu had taught him, other than the obvious trembling, the biggest drawback was probably the hunger after every use of the power. Sulu, who had been in a tense state when he ran out of Area H1, did not feel this. Now that he had truly relaxed, he suddenly understood that the words hungry intestines were indeed very thin and dry. It was like a thin soup without much water, and when written, it would take one's life. The image on the screen returned to the forum of the school's intranet. A post that was marked red by the administrator entered Su Li's line of sight. He stared blankly at the ID of a girl who was obviously asking Prince Black G to be her dance partner for the Double Moon Festival dance party with a love-struck tone. The key point was that the girl had attached a picture. Thus, the post was filled with curses, mainly from the girl. As for Sulu, who was in a state of absolute hunger, he hurriedly turned off the light screen, clutched his stomach, and ran out of his bedroom. When he thought of that girl's face, it was as if he was suddenly full. In the busiest business district of Linhai, there was a quiet street. Bustle and quietness were not contradictory. The so-called quietness in the bustle was a kind of style, while the quietness in the bustle represented a kind of nobility that exuded the smell of money ink. On this quiet street, that was about 200 meters long, the most famous luxury stores in the Federation were gathered. The decorations were elegant, but they had a noble aura. There weren't many customers, but each of them had a reserved look on their faces, fully displaying the attitude of keeping the poor at 1,000 miles away. It was just past noon. Customers of high status or wealthy families wouldn't choose to shop in the snow. However, the uniformed ladies in the CU brand clothing store still maintained a standard smile. Their hands were clasped in front of their stomachs, and they politely looked at the air outside the store. It was as if a rich man would appear at any time. With a crisp sound, the small bronze bell at the door rang. The female service staff in the fitting uniform became spirited at the same time. Their smiles became more gentle, and they went forward to welcome the visitor. However, when they saw the young man who came in, their smiles could not help but stiffen, and they almost could not maintain the image of etiquette that had always been strictly observed. This was because the young man who came in with the light snow was wearing a student uniform that was commonly seen in the university town. In such cold weather, he was still wearing thin clothes, and his clothes were somewhat old. He really did not look like a rich man. In this world, there were many rich kids who liked to play tricks and pretend to be poor. These young ladies had seen many of them, but they also knew that those rich kids only liked to play. No one liked to deliberately make things difficult for their own bodies in this terrible weather. What made them even more sure that this young man did not have the slightest ability to buy was this young man walked into the store while looking at the price tags on the clothes with a shocked expression. The most unbelievable thing was that in his hand, he was holding 3 pieces of deep-fried dough cake that could only be bought at a small stall in the university town. The most unbearable thing for the GU store staff was that these 3 pieces of deep-fried dough cake had the same gap. Obviously, this young man was eating all 3 pieces of deep-fried dough cake at the same time and swallowing so many in one gulp. Would such a poor person who was so hungry enter the famous GU clothing store to buy things? The expression of the manager on duty changed slightly, but she still smiled politely at the young man. Then, she signaled with her eyes for a female employee to come forward and serve him. Although she was very unwilling to let the smell of deep-fried dough cake on this poor young student ruin the faint smell of incense in the GU store, no one could deprive the poor of their right to shop, and she could not do that either. She could only think of a way to ask this poor young student, who was probably here to avoid the snow, to leave quickly. "Sir, is there anything I can help you with?" A female employee asked softly. Sulu, who had been staring blankly at the price tags on the GU clothing, suddenly came back to his senses. He suddenly noticed that the delicate and pretty employee's eyes were inconspicuously sliding over the deep-fried dough cake in his hand. Only then did he realize that he was inappropriate. He smiled apologetically and said, "Sorry, I'm too hungry." The female employee forced a smile and did not reply, but her expression faintly revealed that she did not welcome him. Sulu could not help but sigh in his heart. After a moment of silence, he said, "I'm here to get some clothes." "Get some clothes?" The female employee was slightly taken aback. She could not believe her ears. The GU store's custom-made clothes were extremely expensive. Was this poor young student sure that he had not come to the wrong place? She subconsciously repeated, "Are you sure?" These 3 words were said very impolitely. Even the good-tempered Sulu frowned slightly. The manager on duty also knew that her subordinate had made a mistake, so she hurried over to them in an attempt to ease the atmosphere. However, Sulu just shook his head and said, "Sure, Qinghai ordered 2 sets of clothes. Take them out and let me have a look." This was the first time he had walked into a place that truly belonged to the rich, especially when he thought about how these 2 sets of clothes would cost him tens of thousands of yuan. When Sulu thought about how he only had 300,000 yuan left in his card, he was a little dazed. Hearing the female employee's words, anyone would get angry, but Sulu did not want to care about it. After all, this was not Department 23's TV series. Did he really have to take out his gold card later and buy all the clothes in this clothing store to make these female employees' eyes turn red and feel defeated? Although it felt good to play the pig to eat the tiger, the problem was that he really did not have that much money, Sulu thought with a wry smile. Then he took the 2 sets of clothes and took out his bank card to pay for them. At this time, the manager on duty and the female employee had already apologized multiple times, and the rest of the female employees in the store had successfully gotten rid of the shock on their faces. It is felt that things were getting weirder and weirder in this world. The fitting room is inside. Please follow me. The manager on duty did not take the bank card with a large limit and politely invited Sulu to follow her inside. She glanced discreetly at the 3 deep-fried dough cakes in his hand that had been bitten into crescents and said with a smile, "Can I wrap up your food for you first?" Looking at the energetic young man in front of the full-length mirror, Sulu was quite satisfied with the dark-colored suit. He carefully adjusted the position of the collar, tilted his head, and took a few more looks before the pain in his heart subsided slightly. This faintly glowing dark-colored suit fit him very well. Sulu did not know how the GU store had done it, but he could only admire Shi Qinghai's eyes as a special agent of the Federation's Investigation Bureau. He actually remembered his figure so clearly. The snow outside the window was gradually getting heavier. Sulu looked at it worriedly, wondering what kind of work Shi Qinghai was delayed by. He hoped that it would not be too troublesome. It suits you very well. In order to make up for the lack of staff in the GU store, the female manager who had accompanied them all the way gave a very short and polite comment. It made people feel happy just hearing it. I still need to wait for a friend to try on the suit. Sulu retracted his gaze from outside the window and said to the female manager. The female manager smiled warmly and pointed to a quiet area in the corner of the store. Please wait there for a moment. We have prepared some pastries and coffee for you. You are welcome to try them. Sulu smiled and his mood improved. He walked over there. Of course, he would not object to free food. After all, he was very hungry at this time. The female manager accompanied him in that direction. She was also in a good mood. She did not expect this young man to have such a good temper. He did not take advantage of the impolite mistake made by the staff in the store earlier. What made her mood even better was that although it was snowing lightly in Linhai and the weather was bad, several groups of customers had already appeared in the store just afternoon. It seemed that today's performance was not bad. As the manager of the GU store, she obviously knew that tonight was Li Hua University's Double Moon Festival dance party. However, the rich kids among the students had already ordered their outfits. She didn't know why the guests who suddenly appeared today were in such a hurry. It has nothing to do with me whether I'm in a hurry or not. I hope you can do it for me. A cold and proud voice rang out in the GU store. It was a group of young men and women who were choosing their suits. The one who spoke was a young man about 20 years old. His companions were lucky enough to have chosen their suits. He was the only one who had not chosen a suitable ready-made suit. If the GU store wanted to order a suit, it would take a long time in advance. Everyone knew this. However, time was indeed tight, so he was a little anxious. The manager went up to him and explained a little, but she could not get the other party's understanding. She could not help but sigh in her heart. When this group of customers entered the store, she already knew that they were all people whose names were on the GU VIP list. She could not understand why these big shots, who usually only appeared in the special capital district or the largest city in S1, would appear in Linhai at the same time. Sulu was sitting on the sofa, eating pastries, drinking coffee, and enjoying the warm spring air. He was leisurely waiting for Shi Qinghai. He did not notice the trouble on the other side because it had nothing to do with him. However, he did not expect that trouble would find him in the next moment. My friend, your figure seems to be very similar to mine. I really like the suit you're wearing. I have an urgent need for it tonight. Take it off. I'll pay 10 times the price. Sulu raised his head in shock and saw the young man looking down at him. It was Su Li's wish to help others, but he would never stoop so low, especially when this person seemed to speak calmly. But in reality, there was a sense of righteousness and order in his bones. Thus, Sulu lowered his head and treated this man as heir. You're very rude. We're talking to you, but you don't even look at us. Another proud girl who was dressed like a princess frowned and spoke. She looked at Sulu, who was eating and drinking nonstop on the sofa, with disgust. Sulu frowned. He was just thinking that life wasn't a TV series, so why was he always encountering such inexplicable things? He raised his head and looked at the proud girl who was not ugly, even beautiful, and said seriously, Miss, your figure is very similar to my girlfriend's. She should like your suit very much. Also, we have an urgent need for it. Take it off. I'll pay twice the price. That man was willing to pay 10 times the price, but Sulu was only willing to pay twice the price. The same words were stabbed back. This showed that a calm and gentle young man could occasionally be quite lethal when he was mean. Hearing this, the group of young men and women were stunned at the same time. They did not expect that someone would use such a calm and mocking tone to reply to them. The beautiful proud girl was so angry that her eyes were cold. Sulu looked at her and the man beside her gently and said, I know this is a very rude request, so I take it back. His meaning was very clear. What you did was impolite. You can take it back, or you can only become air in your eyes. You're going to the Double Moon Festival Ball tonight? That man coldly looked at Sulu on the sofa and said, We're going too. Maybe we'll meet again. But I'll repeat myself. You're really not willing to take off your suit in exchange for 10 times the price and my forgiveness for your previous disrespect? Sulu did not expect that these people would be so impolite. He couldn't help but take a deep breath. He thought of the Zoe siblings he met at the entrance of the nightclub. He thought that these so-called people born with a golden key in their mouths were probably so impolite. They were also going to the Double Moon Festival ball tonight. It was just a routine ball in a university. These people who were obviously not students of UA University wanted to join the fun. You're rich, I'm poor. Sulu looked at him and shook his head. You might not see me at the ball. As for disrespect, I forgive your previous disrespect to me. As soon as he said this, the atmosphere became even weirder. The group of young and rich men and women quietly looked at Sulu on the sofa as if they were looking at a monster. Sulu was still drinking his coffee with his head lowered. In his heart, he was cursing Shi Qinghai for picking such a place. Why did he have to enter a non-human clothing store and meet a bunch of non-humans? Chapter 98. It was snowing outside the window, and the atmosphere in the bar was very cold. It was just past noon, so there weren't many customers. Shi Qinghai held a cigarette between his thin lips like he was sucking on a lollipop. He stared at the flickering red light on the end of the cigarette. He was bored to death. His beautiful peach blossom eyes moved closer to his nose because of his concentration, which made him look a little funny. The wooden door of the bar was pushed open, and the cold air rushed in. Shi Qinghai put out the cigarette and pulled out the seat beside him. He looked at the white hair on the man's temples and asked, "What would you like to drink?" "Alcohol," the director of Linhai's HTD bureau said directly after he sat down. Shi Qinghai frowned. He knew this person very well. He used to be a teacher, but he later became a leader and a superior. He knew that this person had always been cautious and didn't like to drink. But he didn't ask anything. He snapped his fingers and asked the people in the bar to bring him a glass of hard liquor. The Thai family seems to have already contacted Representative Pabre. The director almost choked on hard liquor. He coughed and said softly, "If Pabre can get the support of the Thai family, his chances of winning in next year's presidential election will increase by a few points." The Thai family has always been very low-key. So low-key that most people in the Federation have forgotten about their existence. Shi Qinghai admitted that before this intelligence gathering, he didn't pay much attention to this former royal family that had been glorious for countless generations. He raised his glass and took a sip. Even if they used to have the entire Federation, it's been more than 60 constitutional years. How much hidden power can they still have? How can they influence the presidential election? Don't underestimate the existence of the 7 great families. This has been proven in the history of the Federation. Although the Thai family is the most secretive of the 7 great families, if our guess is correct, they should also be the most powerful family among the 7 great families. The director lowered his head and said with a slightly worried voice, "They may not be able to make someone directly elected president, but they can easily make someone's opponent lose. Destruction is always easier than construction." I understand that. Shi Qinghai's eyes were calm. However, although I have always despised politicians, I have to admit that Pabre from Donglin is an anomaly among politicians. If the moral standards and practical spirit he has shown all these years are just a disguise, then I can only say that Pabre played the role of a saint very well. You know what I mean? Shi Qinghai continued. If Pabre becomes the president of the Federation, it will be the best choice for the organization. At least if we want to negotiate, we won't have to worry that the Federation government will be as fickle as before. The bureau chief waved his hand and said, "Morality doesn't mean everything." Pabre, in his election platform and political practice over the years, has always been very careful not to reveal his attitude towards the 4 states surrounding S2. As for the relationship between the Federation government and us, no one knows what kind of thoughts he has. If he chooses to take a strong, offensive attitude towards the organization under the influence of the Hawks in the Department of National Defense in the future, Sure, Qinghai noticed that the bureau chief's eyebrows were full of worry. The bureau chief sighed and said, "Right now, the four states surrounding S2 seem to be enveloped by the joy of the end of the Civil War and the arrival of peace. Senator Medellin has always adhered to the principle of nonviolence. In order to maintain the unity of the comrades, the organization is unable to fully prepare for war. If Pabre chooses to use force to suppress the four states after he is elected president, I am very worried that our comrades will be utterly defeated. The current president is a cowardly and incompetent person, but Pabre is different." The bureau chief said worriedly, "A president who came out of a family of miners must have set extremely high ideals at a very young age. This kind of person is very determined and will definitely not allow the existence of anti-government armed forces within the Federation, especially within the capital ring." But these are all pre-existing worries. Sure, Qinghai glanced at the bureau chief and said, "Today, you took the risk of meeting me under the pretext of a teacher-student reunion. I don't think that's all you want to say." The bureau chief shook his head and looked at the snowflakes outside the window. Suddenly, he said softly, "I just feel that something's going to happen recently, so I came to see you. If there's any problem in the future, I will delete your file immediately. Other than me, he is the only one in the organization who knows that Linhai's old eagle is you. You know, he never cares about specific matters. Even if you want to leave, the organization will not find out. At that time, you'll be truly free." This sentence was extremely inauspicious. As the two most successful anti-government spies within the Federation, Sure Qinghai and the bureau chief had already mentally prepared themselves for the possibility of death at any time. However, when they suddenly heard this sentence, Sure Qinghai could not help but frown. He looked at his teacher quietly and said slowly, "Freedom is indeed something I like very much, but I don't want to use your death as a condition." He patted his teacher's shoulder and said softly, "These past few years have been very tiring for me. I have been constantly sending back information to the four states around the mountains, but I also have to watch that old bastard Macklin continuously throw flirtatious glances at the Federation. I feel very uncomfortable. But teacher, you should know that the reason I am able to persevere until today is because I agree with the organization's philosophy. This world does indeed need to change, but the organization will never use assassinations and terrorist attacks that may affect civilians as a way of fighting. I only hope that this philosophy can be persevered." Sure Qinghai leaned back on the leather sofa and lit a cigarette. He slowly said in the midst of the smoke, "If one day the organization violates this principle, then I can only leave the organization, even if it may lead to me being killed." "What are you trying to say?" The bureau chief frowned and looked at his proud disciple. "Is it about the Double Moon Festival Ball? What did you discover? I just don't understand why the organization is so concerned about the Crown Prince's coming-of-age ceremony. I can understand why Macklin sent that little girl who doesn't know anything." Sure Qinghai flicked the ash from his cigarette and said calmly, "The 7 major families are the biggest vested interests of the Federation. I don't think the Tai family is likely to cooperate with us. If that's the case, what's the point of spending so much to obtain this information? You think the organization will use this Double Moon Festival Ball to assassinate the Crown Prince?" The bureau chief asked seriously. "Yes, other than this, I can't think of any other possibilities. The organization rarely assassinates public figures of the Federation because it will greatly damage the organization's image." The bureau chief looked at Sure Qinghai sternly and said, "Not to mention, the Double Moon Festival Ball will be held in the university town. There will be too many innocent citizens. Your speculation is disrespectful to the organization's principle. I don't trust anyone except you." Sure Qinghai didn't give up his speculation under his teacher's stern gaze. "And if the organization really does assassinate the successor of the Tai family, you and I will be completely unaware. I can only say that we will be the ones who will be abandoned in the future. You can't convince me because the organization's assassination of the successor of the Tai family is not beneficial to our business at all. Cleaning up the sins of the 7 major families in history is the organization's principle. Shi Qinghai narrowed his eyes slightly. And just as you said earlier, the Tai family has already contacted Councilman Pabre. You also analyzed that Councilman Pabre might be leaning towards the Eagle faction. If that's the case, why didn't the organization choose to eliminate Councilman Pabre's greatest support before he becomes the president? The Tai family only has one successor for 7 generations. Shi Qinghai continued his analysis calmly. If we say that this family is the most terrifying existence in the Federation, then from a certain perspective, it is actually the weakest existence. As long as this successor dies, this family will definitely fall apart due to the lack of successor. The bureau chief was silent for a long time. He suddenly wanted to meet his student, Shi Qinghai, because he had some suspicions about the recent movements of the organization. Whether it was Councilman Medellin or those important figures in the Federation, it was necessary for them to get close to the Tai family and show goodwill to the successor of the Tai family. Only the anti-government forces that had resisted the Federation for decades had no reason to care about the whereabouts of the successor of the Tai family, unless the higher-ups of the organization really had some ideas. After a long silence, the bureau chief slowly opened his mouth and said, "But have you thought about it? In the Federation's capital, Xinglinhai, assassinating the successor of the Tai family is basically an impossible mission. Even if there are some radicals in the organization, I don't think there are too many idiots. I believe in this. Even I spent a few months to confirm the successor's exact location. This is enough to show the opponent's strength and cautiousness." Shi Qinghai shrugged and said, "I just hope that you will be more careful during this period of time and pay more attention to the people and information coming from the other side. What are you going to do?" The bureau chief slowly drank the remaining amber liquid in the cup and asked with a slightly red face, "Tonight is the Double Moon Festival Ball. I will personally go and watch. No matter who the organization sends to carry out this plan, I will make sure that he fails." Shi Qinghai's tone was very calm. "You are going against the organization. I hope that this kind of unpleasant thing won't happen. But if the organization really does this behind our backs, without trust, there will only be shameless use and silencing afterwards. I'm no longer a member of the organization." The bureau chief sighed and looked at this young official who was usually very lazy but was now as cold as a knife. He said, "Maybe we are thinking too much. Maybe tonight's ball is just a vanity show for the rich kids. Maybe the higher-ups of the organization really just want to change their way of thinking and try to get in touch with the real power in the Federation in order to seek a more peaceful future." Shi Qinghai raised his eyebrows and smiled. He raised his cup and said, "If that is the case, then that is for the best. The last intelligence report said that the Tai family's coming-of-age ceremony has a very strange rule. If they just want to get in touch with the successor, we don't have as many female students as Senator Macklin. Although I'm still a man after all, am I not?" The bureau chief laughed and said, "We would never sell out women. That is so tasteless." After a while, he calmed down and said with a smile, "The latest order from the higher-ups of the organization is to use all means to get in touch with the successor." "Damn it, you just said that now." Shi Qinghai was stunned for a moment and then cursed. "Looks like tonight's ball won't be a problem. Just be careful." The bureau chief patted him on the shoulder. "Then I will go first. I have a meeting with a friend. It has been delayed for too long." Shi Qinghai walked in the direction of the GU store on the quiet streets of Linhai. He hadn't walked far when he frowned. He lowered his head and glanced at his wristwatch. He pushed open the top cover and saw a line of words appear on the hidden display below. "Don't worry about the ball, because he is here. The address is..." Shi Qinghai was stunned. The only person who could contact him in this way was his teacher who had just broken up with him, the old guy who was the bureau chief of HDD. Obviously, the old guy had just received this information and was very happy or excited when he forwarded it to him. That was why he spoke so casually. Shi Qinghai looked at the line of words in astonishment. Looking at the word him in the second sentence, he suddenly felt that things in the world were incomparably absurd. Earlier, when he was talking with his teacher, he was still talking about him, and now he was here. But why did he come to Lin High? How dare he come? If he really came, it seemed that the organization's attitude toward the Double Moon Festival Ball was really biased toward peace. The organization would never let him take such a risk. Sure, Qinghai forgot to brush the snowflakes off his long eyelashes. He looked at the words on his watch in disbelief. He couldn't help but feel his heart palpitate when he thought about how he was about to meet that big shot. Every spy had their own code name to facilitate one-way communication. Sure, Qinghai's code name was Eagle, and his teacher's code name was Liquor. Sure, Qinghai also knew some of his colleagues who had unfortunately been arrested by the Federation, such as Swallow and Crow, who had been sacrificed. In human history, there were countless spies who were famous because of their code names. However, in this constitutional era, the most powerful spies were almost all from the anti-government forces in the 4 states surrounding the mountains. This was because at the top of the anti-government forces spy system, there was a person with the code name him. He was the second in command of the anti-government forces and the closest comrade of the anti-government forces leader. In the eyes of Sure Qinghai and the others, he was an amazing professional. The Federation had never obtained enough information about such a high-level leader. The anti-government forces had been resisting in the 4 states of S2 for many years, but no one in the Federation knew what the second in command looked like. This alone proved how terrifying he was. In the thin snow and light wind, Sure Qinghai couldn't help but shiver. He was about to pick up that person and then attend the Double Moon Festival Ball. He came to Linhai to meet the young master of the Tai family. But what could the anti-government forces and the Tai family talk about? Sure Qinghai, who could still maintain a calm heart and a lazy smile on his face even when the seawall collapsed in front of him, couldn't help but feel a little shaken after receiving this information. In the past few years, he had obtained a lot of information about the Federation for the anti-government forces. He helped the people in the 4 states to not only survive the battle, but also helped the moderate faction in the anti-government forces to gain a lot of benefits in the local elections. It could be said that he was one of the most successful spies in the anti-government forces in recent years. But in the face of his direct superior's superior, in the face of that him who no one had ever seen, Sure Qinghai had no confidence at all. He had to ensure his absolute safety in Linhai and arrange for him to meet that young man at the Double Moon Festival Ball. The huge pressure made Sure Qinghai frown in an instant. This pressure made him only notice the abnormal situation and hear the specific details of the conflict when he walked into the GU store. With just a glance, Sure Qinghai guessed the purpose of the group of rich men and women. He narrowed his eyes and walked over directly. He said to Su Lu, who was still drinking coffee, "Let's go." Su Lu treated the group of rich men and women as if they were invisible, but he was also a little annoyed. When he saw that Sure Qinghai had finally come, he couldn't help but feel relieved. He stood up and asked, "Do you want me to accompany you to try on the clothes?" "No need." Sure Qinghai narrowed his eyes and glanced at those people. His eyes naturally revealed a trace of indifference. "Manager, how many pairs of shoes do you have in the store? I want all of them." The group of proud rich men and women had been in a conflict with Su Lu. When they saw that fellow companions had come, they were ready to be the first to flip out. However, they didn't expect that Sure Qinghai would flip out before them. The items in the GU store were very expensive. If they wanted to buy all the shoes in the store, how much would it cost? All of the noble people present had the financial ability to do so, but no one would do such a thing as a nouveau riche. The man who had wanted Su Lu to take off his gown looked at Sure Qinghai mockingly and said, "Please continue with your performance." Sure Qinghai ignored him and pulled the beautiful female manager to pay the bill. The female manager had seen strange people who liked to flaunt their wealth, but she still felt that it was a little strange to ask for all the shoes to be packed. Su Lu followed behind him, dumbfounded. He asked, Where did you get so much money? Don't you have a bank card? Sure, Qinghai said. Su Lu smiled bitterly and said in a low voice, I still have more than 100,000 yuan. A pair of shoes here costs a few thousand yuan. How can it be enough to buy all of them? Sure, Qinghai smiled warmly and patted him on the shoulder. Brother, you don't know the limit of your card, right? You can overdraft it, and the limit is very high. Su Lu took out the 3 Lin Lin Alliance Bank card that the uncle had given him. He couldn't believe his eyes. He felt very distressed when he saw that the card had been swiped successfully. At this moment, all the shoes in the GU store belonged to him alone. The female manager's performance today was really amazing. She looked at Su Lu with a smile, returned the card with both hands, and said, We look forward to your next visit. Sure, Qinghai told the other party to send all the shoes to a certain address tomorrow afternoon. Then he patted Su Lu on the shoulder and proudly walked out of the store under the watchful eyes of the GU store staff. When they walked past the group of rich men, the man sneered and said, So there are indeed a lot of idiots in Linhai. How could they do such a tasteless thing like burning money? Idiot? Who are you talking about? This time, Sure Qinghai didn't remain silent. He turned around with a smile and looked at the man. I just want to know, if a bunch of idiots bought goose gowns but can't even get a pair of goose shoes, what kind of happy scene would it be when they attend the ball? The crowd was stunned for a moment before they became angry. Only now did they realize that this guy in a wrinkled suit was actually so sinister. In the Empire, it was said that the places that ordered the gowns would never make shoes. Also, mixing and matching was a style that was highly praised. However, in the Federation, this was absolutely impossible. It's getting late. Sure Qinghai looked at his watch and said sincerely, I hope you guys can get everything ready before the ball. There are many stores on this street. Do you think I'll buy all of their shoes? Walking in the wind and snow, Su Lu couldn't help but laugh when he thought of the rich men's expressions. He didn't know anything about the etiquette of the upper class, but he could guess that Sure Qinghai's move would definitely make the other party suffer. The next moment, the smile on his face turned into helplessness and distress. He looked at Sure Qinghai and said, So much money. How can I pay it back? Idiot, the goods will be delivered tomorrow afternoon. Cancel this deal in the morning. Sure Qinghai didn't even look at him and said disdainfully, I say, you're too honest. You don't even know how to talk back when you're being bullied by that group of people. You don't even know how to use these little tricks. How can you pretend to be something in society? Su Lu rubbed the back of his head. He wanted to say that he had already said a few harsh words, but he just smiled and said, I'm used to using my hands, not my mouth. Sure Qinghai was stunned. Thinking of the fight between Su Lu and the Special Forces soldier in the nightclub, he couldn't help but laugh loudly on the quiet and luxurious famous street in Linhai. I still have something to do. At a corner of the street, Sure Qinghai stopped and looked at Su Lu with a smile. I may have something to do at the ball tonight. You can play by yourself. Maybe you can get that Zhang Xiaoming back. The life of a spy was always stressful. When he knew that he was coming, Sure Qinghai was used to being frivolous. He wanted to vent Su Li's anger and relieve his pressure. But since he was here, Sure Qinghai knew that he couldn't accompany Su Lu tonight. Su Li saw a touch of heaviness in his smile. Thinking of the voice on the phone, he frowned and asked, Are you in trouble? Big trouble. Sure Qinghai smiled bitterly, patted him on the shoulder, and said, Let's go. After Su Li left, Sure Qinghai went to deal with his own big trouble. Next to the fountain in the middle of an extremely lively food plaza, he took a sausage and gnawed on it. While waiting for the arrival of the most mysterious intelligence chief, he cursed in his heart that the synthetic meat was not delicious. Should he ask his teacher to get some wild animals from HDD Bureau for a sumptuous meal? At this moment, a person walked up to him and asked, Is it good? Sure Qinghai turned around and saw a very wretched middle-aged man staring at the sausage in his hand with shining eyes. He was stunned for a moment, then subconsciously handed the sausage over. Chapter 99. The wretched middle-aged man seemed to be very hungry. He swallowed the sausage in one gulp and sighed. Damn, the stowaway spaceship doesn't provide airline meals. How shameless. Young man, where did you go just now? I'm starving to death. Shi Qinghai gasped and said, I went shopping with a friend. That little doorman called Sulu? The middle-aged man's mouth was still stuffed with sausage, so his words were a bit unclear. Okay, take me to eat first. Shi Qinghai smiled bitterly and led the middle-aged man to the restaurant on the third floor. He didn't need to check the secret code at all. The only person who could find him in a crowd, know that he had a friend called Sulu, and be so wretched and ordinary that no one would want to take a second look at him. It could only be him. In the quiet restaurant, Shi Qinghai stared at the middle-aged man across the table. He had already gotten rid of the shock. Yes, he would never have thought that the second in command of the anti-government forces, the one who gave the FBI and the Special Task Force so much headaches that they could not wait to devour his flesh and chew on his bones, was actually such a person. In the spy business, especially for high-level spies, the more ordinary the better. However, Shi Qinghai always felt that this man was a bit ugly. Shi Qinghai was a proud person. After getting rid of the shock, the first thing he said to his boss was not respectful. Do you know how many people in the Federation want you dead? Not many, only 4 people. The middle-aged man lowered his head and ate the noodles. He said vaguely, the President, the Minister of Defense, the Director of the Special Task Force, the Director of the Federation Investigation Bureau. HDD only cares about wild rabbits. If the Bureau of Proclamation cared about me, I would have been dead long ago. Shi Qinghai frowned slightly. After the mysterious aura of the person in front of him disappeared, it was hard for him to get used to it. At this time, he was actually in the mood to joke. It was really hard for him to bear. He couldn't help but say, do you know that if a person of your status suddenly appears in Lin Hai, I'm the one most likely to be killed? You're ranked second. After the middle-aged man finished his noodles, he raised his head with a smile and said, if you're afraid of death, you'll come. If you're not afraid of death, I'll come with sincerity. Since I've entered this line of work, I can't be afraid of death. Old Eagle, you've done well these past few years. I believe that your arrangements will ensure my safety. Hearing the familiar yet strange code name of Old Eagle, Shi Qinghai's beautiful eyebrows furrowed even more. I didn't prepare at all. How can I bring you into the dance to meet the Crown Prince? He looked at this A-rank wanted criminal of the Federation and felt that there was something familiar about that distorted face of his. He stared at the space between the other's brows and the corners of his eyes, saying, even if you change your appearance right now, it's still too dangerous. Having his disguise seen through by Shi Qinghai, the middle-aged man smiled slightly and didn't care at all. He knew that the young comrade in front of him had his own pride. After a moment of silence, he said, I believe that you've already prepared in such a short time. Shi Qinghai sighed helplessly and handed over an invitation card. Like a magic trick, he took out a bag from his side and handed it over. This is the invitation card and the clothes. The problem is the field office has always kept a close watch on us employees. If you appear beside me like this and want to follow me into the dance, it'll be hard for others not to be suspicious. How do I introduce you to others? You have a second uncle called Shi. The middle-aged man smiled and said, from this moment onwards, I am Shi. He just finished an investigation on the Ore planet in outer space and came back to find you. He'll also go to the dance while he's at it. Shi Qinghai had almost forgotten what his uncle looked like. He asked, where's the real Shi? He's still carrying out engineering experiments on their planet. If the information from the kids below is correct, he should be on his way to S3. Coincidentally, we can control that spaceship. Shi Qinghai wasn't surprised by the man's meticulous arrangements. If the intelligence chief of the anti-government army made such a mistake, he wouldn't have been able to survive so many years under the pursuit of the Federation. After a moment of silence, he said, I can bring you in, but whether or not you can see the Crown Prince is not up to me. You should know from the return receipt that until now, UA University has protected him very well. Other than the principal, no one has come close to him, not even the Zhou family. Young man, sometimes when you're in contact with certain people, you don't have to beat around the bush. Perhaps the most direct method is also the most effective method. The middle-aged man smiled and said, I'm not a spy like you. I only think about things more directly. Sure, Qinghai stared at him blankly. He thought to himself, the most successful spy chief in the 37th Constitution of Human Society actually said that he wasn't a spy. If he hadn't heard it from this legendary figure himself, he would definitely have thought that this was a very bad joke. If you want to meet the heir of the Tai family, you can only use your real identity. After this is over, my identity will definitely be exposed. What does the organization plan to do with me? When it came to the most crucial part, sure, Qinghai asked directly, I don't want to face the wrath of the entire Federation Investigation Department. The people in the mountains have never had a channel to meet the people with real power in the Federation. After all, we are not people who can appear in public like Mr. Macklin, the middle-aged man said with a smile. Now, this is an opportunity, and it's worth the risk. If a negotiation with the other party goes well, they will definitely use their family's power in the Federation to help us hide everything. If a negotiation doesn't go well, I don't think it will be possible for me to go back alive. If that's the case, it might not be a bad choice for you to accompany me to meet George Macklin. Sure, Qinghai's expression changed. He didn't expect this leader of the anti-government army to say something like this. However, he immediately sensed something else from the man's words, especially when he referred to Mr. Macklin as Mr. Macklin. Mr. Macklin was the title of the internal organization of the anti-government army. He frowned and asked, the people in the mountains can't hold on much longer? The middle-aged man still maintained his smile, but there was a sense of vicissitudes and sorrow in his smile. The elections in the 4 states surrounding the mountains were successful. Mr. Macklin received a lot of support. The people who insisted on having their own armed forces, including me, are all feeling a little lonely. The federal military is still preparing for the attack. If the situation continues to develop like this, I don't know how long the people in the mountains can hold on. Sure, Qinghai was silent for a long time. He was very worried about the safety of his companions in the mountains, but he was more curious about what benefits the organization was trying to get by taking such a huge risk to send him to attend the coming-of-age ceremony of the successor of the Tai family. After a while, he gave up the urge to ask about the inside story and said seriously, Thank you for telling me the truth. I believe in your loyalty to your beliefs. Beliefs don't mean loyalty. I just don't like this federation. Sure, Qinghai said with a smile. Actually, I've always been very curious about how I should address you other than that too simple code name. You can call me a mountain person, the middle-aged man said with a smile. Sula didn't know that tonight's Double Moon Festival Ball had become a stage for the people with high positions in the Federation to show themselves. It had even gradually evolved into a competition between the two anti-government forces. He also didn't know that the center of this whirlpool was the young man named Tai Ziyuan. How could he have known that his friend was actually a big shot who could influence the entire Federation? The ball was held in a quiet building in Yue University. The green trees around the building were covered with a layer of frost. Under the illumination of the lights, they looked as beautiful as a jade palace. Sulu was waiting for sure Qinghai at the entrance, bored to death. He looked up at the sky and saw that the clouds in the sky had long disappeared. Countless stars surrounded the 2 round moons that were gradually approaching. The scenery was so empty that it made people even more worried. Zhang Xiaoming will appear at the ball with that congressman's son, right? Sula looked at the 2 round moons in the sky and thought with narrowed eyes. His heart was filled with an indescribable emptiness. If sure Qinghai wasn't coming, perhaps he would have preferred to stay in the H1 area and continue the seemingly never-ending level 6 training. Of course, after what happened in the general gymnasium today, Sulu wasn't sure if he would have a chance to enter the H1 area again. Someone patted his shoulder. He turned around and was very happy to see sure Qinghai's face. At the same time, he also noticed that under the other's casual expression, there was a hidden heaviness, and beside him was a middle-aged man. Sure, Qinghai didn't want to meet Sulu tonight, but for some reason, The bold anti-government army leader beside him pointed out Su Li's direction and said he wanted to come over and say hello. "I'm Qinghai's uncle. You're Su Lu, right? I often hear him mention you in his letters." The middle-aged man chuckled and said to Su Lu, "You can also call me uncle." Su Lu was startled. He thought that he had never heard Mr. Shi mention him before, but he still obediently called him uncle. He didn't notice that Shi Qinghai's face was unusually expressive. At this time, Su Li's eyes suddenly became calm because he saw a line of expensive cars slowly driving to the main road in front of the building. The heavy car doors opened one by one, and a line of well-dressed men and women walked over in a reserved manner. The daughter of the Zhou family, who was wearing a red evening gown, walked at the front. The men and women he saw in the GU store in the afternoon were walking side by side with her. They seemed to be of high status as well. Trouble seemed to be coming. Shi Qinghai whispered a few words to the middle-aged man, but the middle-aged man just smiled and shook his head. Su Lu didn't notice any of this. He was staring at the woman in the middle of the group, Zhang Xiaoming, who was wearing a light blue silk dress and walking towards him like an elf. Chapter 100. This double moon festival ball at Yue University, because of the existence of a certain descendant of an aristocratic family, had an extremely important symbolic meaning. No one knew that the coming-of-age ceremony for the former successor of the royal family had already been arranged by a fellow named Su Lu. Those politicians and famous businessmen who had obtained the inside information through various channels had all sent their own descendants to participate in the ball in hopes of forming a relationship with the crown prince of the Tai family. If their daughters could be chosen by Tai Ziyuan to become his life partner in the future, that would be an incomparably fortunate matter. Of course, the people of the 7 great families, those truly important figures, would definitely not lower themselves to take the initiative to express their goodwill or intentions of forming a marriage alliance. At most, they would come to observe the ceremony. At this time, whether or not those low-key second-generation members of the 7 great families would be present at the ball, no one would know. At this time, the group of people who had gotten off the expensive car and were slowly walking towards the entrance with an imposing manner, although they were not from the 7 great families, their family backgrounds were extremely profound. In the eyes of the ordinary citizens of the Federation, they were naturally from a privileged class. Walking at the front of the group, Zoe was wearing a red strapless evening gown today. Her bare shoulders perfectly displayed a bit of sexiness, but the ingenious design of the gown covered most of the spring scenery in front of her chest, making her appear even more delicate. Compared to the cold indifference at the entrance of the nightclub that day, this Zhou family's eldest daughter's face was filled with calmness. She looked more like a young girl who had just entered puberty, and not an arrogant and proud daughter of the heavens. Zhou immediately recognized the 2 young men on the stairs, especially the beautiful hooligan with a repulsive smile and wearing a black GU suit. Her eyes immediately became cold and fiery. The coldness was due to her mood, and the fiery heat was due to her anger. She had never been hit by anyone in her life. Ever since she met the crown prince, even her parents and brothers were incomparably polite to her. Other than this small official from the Federation Investigation Bureau called Shi Qinghai, who would dare to slap her? She led her companions up the stairs and suddenly felt a burning sensation on her face. However, she knew that these people around her were from families with high positions in the Federation. Since they had suddenly come to Linhai to participate in Lihua University's Double Moon Festival dance, they must have some ulterior motives. The eldest daughter of the Zhou family did not want these people to know that she had been humiliated in Linhai, so she decided to forcefully suppress the anger in her heart. She looked straight ahead and pretended that she did not know the 2 people on the stairs. The rich men and women walked up the stairs, but the 3 people on the stairs didn't seem to have any intention of letting them through. Su Li's eyes were fixated on Zhang Xiaoming, who was standing next to the congressman's son, and he had forgotten to step aside. The middle-aged man beside him, on the other hand, was looking at this scene with a smile on his face, as if he didn't know whether to step aside or not. Shi Qinghai, on the other hand, had a lot on his mind. He had been planning his escape after the ball ended, so he didn't have the mood to care about these little kids. The three people on the stairs didn't give way, and the two parties were about to collide. To Zhou Yu's surprise, although she didn't have any intention of causing trouble, the expressions of the rich men and women around her changed. These people recognized the two young people blocking their way. They were the two people who had severely humiliated them in the GU store this afternoon. A well-educated dog would never rudely block a person's way. The man who had contemptuously asked Su Lu to give up his clothes in the GU store this afternoon looked coldly at the three people on the stairs and said this in a mocking tone. Su Lu didn't even have eyes for him. He only stared at Zhang Xiaoming, who was standing in the group opposite him, and said with some difficulty, "You're here." At this time, the middle-aged man and Qinghai whispered something to each other. It was as if the three people on the stairs didn't see the arrogant man at all. The response to the provocation was disregard, and it was the most humiliating type of disregard. The faces of the man and his companions turned even uglier. Hearing Su Li's words, the son of Lin Hai's councilman, Hai Qingzhou, smiled and lowered his head to look at Zhang Xiaoming with concern. Zhang Xiaoming had already seen the familiar figure on the stairs and subconsciously lowered her head. Her long eyelashes rested on her fair face as she said softly, "Yes, you're here too?" Hearing Zhang Xiaoming's reply, Hai Qingzhou's expression changed slightly. The group of men and women also noticed that there seemed to be some problems between the three of them. A moment later, the man found out about the gossip about Yue University from the people around him, and a cold smile appeared on his face. He moved closer to Su Li's ear and said, "So you're just a poor student with good luck." Seeing this scene, does your heart hurt? Where did the arrogance from this afternoon go? All right, Miss Zhang isn't someone you can get close to. Wake up, but in the future, if I have the chance to get close to her, I'll definitely tell you what I learned. You know, I haven't played with a girl who came back from the 4 states. The man's voice was very soft, so other than Su Lu and Qinghai beside him, no one heard what he said. When Su Lu saw Zhang Xiaoming walk in with the councilman's son, his mood had already hit rock bottom. When he heard this, he finally reacted and slowly took a step back, as if to avoid the man's bad breath. He looked at the man from the capital and said seriously, "Do you want to fight?" The man laughed out loud, as if he found it amusing to hear such a low-level threat at such an important event. He shook his head and laughed. "I'm not a rude student like you. I won't do things like fighting, but if there's a chance, I'll let you have a taste of being beaten." When he said the last sentence, the expression on his face had become extremely cold. He had already made up his mind that after the ball was over, he would definitely let his bodyguard teach this young student who dared to not give him face the most profound lesson. He thought his words were very appropriate and dignified. However, Sula didn't pay attention to what he said at all. He raised his fist and punched the man's face. With a muffled sound, 2 streams of blood spurted out from the man's nostrils, and one of his front teeth flew out. "Since you want to fight, then let's fight." Su Lu repeated and threw another punch, directly smashing that young master to the ground. When he swung his fist, the stuffiness in his chest dissipated a lot. He was too lazy to care about what kind of trouble he would get into afterwards. Just like what he had said to Qinghai in the afternoon. When faced with other people's unreasonable ridicule and vicious words, this orphan from the Donglin district was only used to using his hands, not his mouth. Under the green trees and bright lights, the entrance to the ball was in an uproar. Countless students and teachers who were attending the ball cast their eyes on the scene. Those who were at the center of the incident couldn't hide the shock on their faces. They only saw a young master's son go up and say something to the student who blocked his way, and then that student punched young master's son to the ground. Was that student crazy? How dare he hit someone in front of so many people? However, what made these rich kids disappointed was that Sula didn't seem to be crazy at all. He just calmly punched the man, and this calmness made them feel even more confused. In the afternoon, the beautiful girl in the GU store screamed and supported the man who was rolling down the stone steps. She pointed at Su Li's nose and scolded him in a sharp voice. "Do you know who we are? How dare you hit my brother?" the son and daughter of Sun Chinkin, a member of the Energy Source Committee of the Federation Management Committee, would never have thought that there would be someone who dared to hit them like a sandbag after leaving the capital and coming to Linhai. After hearing the girl's words, Su Lu frowned. He thought to himself, "Of course I don't know who you are. I only know that your brother is asking for a beating. Security, where's the security?" Of course, it wasn't convenient to bring bodyguards into the ball today. The group of rich kids looked angrily at Su Lu on the steps and shouted loudly. At this time, Shi Qinghai had finished whispering with the middle-aged man. He walked in front of Su Lu and welcomed the anger of those people. After a moment of silence, he suddenly laughed and said, "This world is really interesting. My brother asked you if you wanted to fight. Since you want to fight, then it's normal for you to be hit." He withdrew his smile, and there was a hint of sarcasm in his calm voice. "Of course I don't know who you are. I think you want to tell me who your parents are, but we never care about this kind of thing. I just think it's funny that you want to ask about family background when you want to fight. You're not kids anymore. Are you going to cry and go home to find your parents when you're hurt?" Shi Qinghai didn't know what had just happened, but he knew that Su Lu, who looked calm at this time, was in a very bad mood. As a friend, he didn't need to be reasonable. He had to stand in front. Of course, because there was that horrible uncle of his at the ball today, he didn't want to stand out, but his uncle gave him an order. He stared at Zhou Yu, who was in front of the crowd, and thought that it was this unruly woman who had caused the current situation. He said calmly, "Miss Zhou, haven't you had enough of those slaps last time? Do you want Director Zhou to drag you back to the capital again before you're satisfied?" Zhou Yu wanted to keep a low profile today because she thought that tonight would be the most important day of her life. But she didn't expect that the rogue official on the steps would say in front of everyone that she felt the most humiliated thing. Her face suddenly became extremely cold. She stared at Shi Qinghai and said, "Shi Qinghai, there's a ball tonight. I don't want you to die now." The people at the entrance of the ball were shocked by the scene of a student beating up the Federation representative's son, but they were immediately attracted by this conversation. They listened in disbelief. Only now did they know that the young miss of the Zhou family had also suffered at the hands of these two young people. These years, the Zhou family siblings were extremely arrogant in that circle. Who could make her suffer? Everyone looked at Su Lu and Shi Qinghai in a different light. They kept guessing who was behind them. Zhou Yu took a deep breath, suppressed the anger in her heart, and said to her companions, "Today is my home ground. Give me some face." Someone helped the young master of the Sun family, whose face was covered in blood, up. The young master of the Sun family used a handkerchief to wipe the blood from his nose. He looked at Su Lu gloomily, thinking that after the ball was over, he would make this young man beg for death. Zhou Yu noticed Su Li's gaze and wanted to warn him, but after thinking about it for a moment, she didn't say anything. Instead, she looked deeply at Su Lu. Because of this poor student, the Crown Prince had crippled Hook and banned Zhou Yu from entering Linhai province. Even she was a little afraid of such a person. Chapter 101. You did a good job today. I suddenly find myself appreciating you. Shi Qinghai looked at Zhou Yu's red evening gown with a smile. However, those two gentle, affectionate, and pure gazes made Zhou Yu feel as if he was naked and extremely uncomfortable. For some reason, Shi Qinghai, who had a wanted criminal of the anti-government army with him, should have kept a low profile, but at this time he was so arrogant. But you still have to take care of the dogs around you. Of course, Xiaoming is not included. This group of young men and women were not good people, especially after the young master of the Sun family suffered a big loss. In their hearts, they had already sentenced Su Lu to be disabled for life. Their eyes were full of disdain, coldness, and pity. It was only because of Zhou Yu's suppression that they did not immediately settle the score and maintained a little demeanor. At this time, when they heard Shi Qinghai's aggressive and unrestrained words, they almost couldn't bear it anymore. Only dogs understand the etiquette of well-educated dogs. Shi Qinghai looked at these people and said with a smile, "In fact, sometimes I really don't understand you second generations. You can't beat others in scolding or fighting. Besides being born into a good family, what's the use of you in this life? Don't try to threaten me with that kind of look. What's all you can't do? Do you think you can do? Don't forget that the Federation is a society ruled by law. It is a place that is reasonable. If you really annoy me, I'll let the Federation TV station expose your virtues. I'm sure your family will be very disappointed. Sure, Qinghai, that's enough. Hearing this rogue official mention her brother again, Zhou Yu's tender face darkened. She coldly scolded, "If you think you haven't vented your anger, you can make a scene at the ball later. Don't block the door and make a fool of yourself. It's you who are making a fool of yourself. I'm not worried about anything." Sure, Qinghai looked at her with a gentle smile, but pulled Su Li's arm to the side to make room for him. "I'll invite you to dance at the ball later. I hope you won't refuse." Zhou Yu's expression changed for a moment. No one knew what she was thinking. She said a few words to her companions. The group of people walked past Su Lu and Shi Qinghai with different expressions, but they didn't use their eyes or actions to provoke them. Speaking of which, the combination of Su Lu and Shi Qinghai was indeed very effective in dealing with these rich second generations. The gatekeeper had a calm personality, but when things came to a head, he would take action without hesitation. Mr. Shi also had a mouth that could make people vomit blood. The so-called well-versed in both pen and sword referred to this pair. The ball had not yet started, but soft music was already coming from the building. Su Lu withdrew his gaze from the light blue gown and looked up at the sky. Shi Qinghai patted him on the shoulder with a smile and said, "Even if it's a foregone conclusion, there's no need to pretend to be lonely in front of me. It's too mushy." Su Lu smiled bitterly. He had beaten up that person and thought that there would be a fierce conflict. He didn't expect that the other party would force himself to swallow his anger. He shook his head and said, "I found that there's something wrong with my personality. I used to think that I was a very tolerant person, but after coming to Lihua, I found that there are many things that I can't tolerate. Everyone has a bottom line. If the son of Sun Village didn't touch your bottom line, with your honest personality, how could you explode?" Shi Qinghai smiled and said, "After the ball is over, be careful." But his family is different from the Zhou family. They don't have any military background. They don't have a gun. With your skills, you can beat up their bodyguards to vent your anger. At this moment, the middle-aged man who had been silently watching the young man's farce with a smile suddenly looked up at the sky. After a while, he sighed and said, "Look at the two moons in the sky. They really look like a pair of beautiful breasts." Su Lu and Shi Qinghai raised their heads in astonishment, only to see two bright, full moons gradually approaching each other in the dark blue night sky, overshadowing the radiance of the stars in the sky. The two bright moons were perfectly round and pure white, and if one really thought about it, it was indeed somewhat similar to that part. During the day, it was still snowing, but at night, it was a good time to admire the moon. It was said that for this ball, Lihua University used extremely powerful connections and mobilized the climate interference team of the federal military to create such a beautiful blue night. With such beautiful scenery in the sky, it seemed that it didn't matter if they spent a little more money. Shi Qinghai looked up at the moon and smacked his lips for a while. As a playboy, he couldn't help but feel that this uncle next to him was a confidant. Thinking of this, the alienation and reverence he had for this person in his heart lessened a lot. Only then did he realize that those gorilla guys in the mountains were not as boring as St. George. Su Lu shook his head and thought, "This uncle next to me is indeed the uncle of the rogue Mr. Shi. He has a lot of knowledge. He can even think of the beautiful scenery of the two moons in the sky as erotic." For a moment, he also classified this uncle as a pervert. But he would never have thought that the person next to him was a terrifying person in the official files of the Federation. Accompanied by the melodious melody of Damon's violin, Lihua University's Double Moon Festival Ball officially began. It hadn't reached the stage of dancing yet. The male students, who had feigned excitement and a sense of novelty on their faces, were wearing formal clothes that were rarely seen. They held glasses of wine and gathered in groups of 5 or 6 like adults, chatting about something. Sulu and the other two walked into the venue without attracting any attention. They chose a quiet and secluded place. I really don't know why I came. Sulu lowered his eyes slightly and took a sip of the champagne in his glass. He thought to himself, the principal really spent a lot of money for this ball. I really wish you didn't come today. Sure, Qinghai suddenly said very seriously. Then he solemnly handed his uncle over to Sulu to manage. He elegantly held his champagne glass and walked to another quiet and conspicuous place in the party. Sulu was slightly surprised. He raised his head and noticed that Shi Qinghai was walking in the direction where Zhou Yu, Zhang Xiaoming, and the other rich kids were gathered. He couldn't help but worry and said, "He's going to cause trouble again? I didn't realize he was such a hot-blooded person. Oh, maybe it's because he has his eyes on a girl." The uncle beside him chuckled and said, "Lihua University's Double Moon Festival Ball has a tradition. The boys will use the first dance as a sign of love. But before the invitation, the boys have to make some arrangements beforehand to ensure that they won't be rejected later. You're a student of Lihua University, right? Don't you know about this tradition?" Sulu watched as Shi Qinghai walked in front of Zhou Yu, who was wearing a red evening gown. He looked at Zhang Xiaoming, who was wearing a blue evening gown beside Zhou Yu, who looked like an orchid. He replied with a slightly bitter voice, "I know about this tradition. I thought I would have a dance partner today, but my dance partner suddenly didn't want me. You have to learn from Qinghai's shamelessness in this aspect." Uncle Shi looked over with a smile. On the other side, Shi Qinghai and Zhou Yu seemed to be trying to convince each other in a low and murderous voice. Sulu looked over in confusion, wondering if Mr. Shi really had his eyes on that venomous woman. He had to admit that Zhou Yu was a very beautiful woman. However, after the incident at the nightclub, in Suli's eyes, those seductive curves and eyes became illusions. Then, Shi Qinghai and Zhou Yu left the ball under the surprised gazes of the rich kids. No one knew where they went. Sulu shook his head, and his gaze fell on the sky-blue evening gown again. The middle-aged man beside him noticed his gaze and suddenly said, "You like her?" Sulu was silent for a moment before saying, "Yes." The middle-aged man smiled and said, "Trust me, her dance partner tonight should be you." At this moment, the band suddenly became louder, covering their conversation. As the music stopped, the principal of Yue University, dressed in a solemn suit, appeared in front of the microphone on the second floor. With a smile on his face, he looked at the dense crowd of young students downstairs and felt gratified. He said, "Welcome, everyone." When the principal was giving a speech, Shi Qinghai and Zhou Yu returned to the ball at the same time. Sulu looked at Shi Qinghai next to him and noticed that there was a bloodstain on his lips. He immediately associated it with something unsightly that happened in the back garden. He sighed in surprise and said, "It turns out that the courage of a pervert can really cover the sky. But why did she go out with you?" Shi Qinghai cursed a few words in a low voice and quickly glanced over there. He noticed that Zhou Yu was wiping her lips with a handkerchief with a sorrowful look. It was not something to be proud of to let a girl who dreamed of becoming a princess tonight be utterly defeated in front of a sex scandal file. Although Shi Qinghai was a playboy, he was used to having tender feelings for girls. Looking at the desolation in Zhou Yu's eyes, he could not help but frown. The disgust he had for this proud and cold young lady faded a little. He also did not understand. Even if the crown prince did not choose Zhou Yu as his dance partner tonight, how would it help the organization's mission? Thinking of this, he could not help but look at the uncle next to him with disgust. As the second most important person in the anti-government army, he actually paid attention to a girl's privacy. Although he had to admit that this guy had a terrifying intelligence network, he still could not accept this kind of purposeful way of doing things. No one listened carefully to the principal's speech. All the young students who did not know the inside story of the ball were excitedly waiting for the moment when the dance music started. They wanted to enjoy their youth and love to their heart's content. Perhaps there were a lot of lucky people at the ball tonight, but there were also a lot of losers. But they had tried hard to reach out to their love, which was enough for them to remember for a long time in the future. The potting dance finally started, and it flowed through the ballroom like water. Although there were already quite a lot of people, the ballroom still seemed relatively empty. The beautiful melody soothed people's lonely hearts and urged them to dance to the music. Su Lu had been looking at Zhang Xiaoming, who was standing beside the son of the senator in the distance, and his eyes narrowed slightly. The middle-aged man next to him suddenly said, "I just said that her dance partner tonight must be you." Su Lu smiled bitterly and said, "Thank you, but that's impossible. If you take me to the second floor later." The middle-aged man smiled sincerely. "God will definitely satisfy your wish." Chapter 102. Second floor. Only now did Su Lu notice that compared to the bustling dance floor below, the second floor was exceptionally quiet. There were a few men wearing dark-colored waiter uniforms on the walkway, and they were vigilantly watching the people approaching. Puzzled, he glanced up and found that other than the principal of Yue University, no one else from the university had appeared, including those highly respected professors. Could it be that there was an important person on the second floor who needed the principal's company? He glanced at the middle-aged man beside him and said with a smile, "One look, and I can tell that there must be some distinguished guest of the university upstairs. Even the eldest daughter of the Zhou family and those youngsters know the rules and didn't go up. So how can I? But if I can go up later, I'll bring you along." This had nothing to do with being willing to help others. Su Lu purely thought that he was joking. He was only a gatekeeper and auditing student of Yue University. It was already good enough that he could attend the ball today, although he didn't want to attend. He just wanted to see her. But when this joke fell into the middle-aged man's ears, a light flashed through his ugly triangular eyes. He chuckled and patted Su Li's shoulder without saying anything else. At this time, the ball had become lively. Those thick-skinned upperclassmen pretended to be mature and courteous as they sent out invitations to the female students who were wearing all kinds of gowns. Spurred on by this, the people who were originally a little embarrassed began to move towards the goddesses in their hearts. Fortunately, the gender difference in Area S1 was the opposite of Donglin area, and there was indeed a lot of porridge. In a short time, many couples had succeeded. The young people dancing to the music had happy smiles on their faces, while the girls' faces were somewhat shy. No matter how they looked, at least at this moment, they were the most beautiful. Out of Su Li's expectations, there was actually a girl who was brave enough to take the initiative to invite him to dance. He never thought that he, who had an ordinary appearance, would be able to receive the attention of a girl. Shocked, he somewhat hurriedly rejected, not daring to look at the girl's disappointed expression. He had actually underestimated his reputation in Yue University. He was the student that Professor Zhou admired the most in the mechanical engineering class, and he, who had set a few records in a laboratory building, had long since gained a secret admirer after the story of guarding the beauty in the plum garden. To avoid the awkwardness, Su Lu subconsciously raised his head and looked into the distance. Coincidentally, he saw Zhang Xiaoming's action of avoiding his gaze. His heart trembled slightly, and he knew that she was looking at him just now. He took a deep breath and stared at Zhang Xiaoming for a long time. He watched as Zhang Xiaoming gently rejected the invitations of many boys. She also did not step onto the dance floor with Haiqing Zhou, the son of the councilman, beside her. His mood improved slightly. "He is looking at you." Haiqing Zhou looked at the students who were happily hugging each other on the spacious dance floor and said softly to the girl beside him. Zhang Xiaoming looked straight ahead with a faint smile on her lips. She replied, "I know, but what does this have to do with me?" Haiqing Zhou smiled and said, "But you were also peeking at him just now. It seems that your relationship with him is not like what you said, a relationship between a pursuer and a rejecter." Zhang Xiaoming's eyelashes fluttered. After a moment of silence, she said, "It's all in the past. You're really not going to dance with me? You know that I like you more and more now." In order to hide his sadness, Haiqing Zhou lightly shrugged his shoulders. "Although I know that if you're going to dance with me, it might be because of some other reason. I'm very sorry," Zhang Xiaoming said apologetically. I made it very clear to you last time that I cannot accept your good intentions. Her expression became somewhat lonely. She glanced at the dance floor and said, I was very stupid in the past. I have already hurt one person. I don't want to hurt a second person. Hai Qingzhou knew that she was looking at Su Lo. His smile was somewhat awkward. He bitterly smiled and said, It's a pity that I don't even have the qualifications to be hurt by you. It had to be said that this was a very gentlemanly sentence. It was easy for young people with good family backgrounds to show their gentlemanly demeanor in their own social circle. For example, the children of rich families around the two of them, including the young master of the Sun family who had just finished his treatment, were all very polite as they watched everything on the dance floor. They did not reveal the slightest bit of arrogance. The circle that these young people were in was very different from the lively dance party. It was because they were too quiet. Moreover, from their clothes and temperament, it was obvious that they were not ordinary students from Yue University. None of them went down to dance. Naturally, the students would not come forward to invite the princess-like girls. If they did not know Zhang Xiaoming and knew that she was a student of Yue University. Otherwise, they would not have had the courage to invite her. There was only one exception. Mr. Shi, who was wearing a goose suit, smiled again. He ignored the group's murderous gazes and came in front of them. He elegantly bowed to Zhou Yu and said softly, Can you dance with me? Zhou Yu's expression was unusually cold. She looked at the extremely beautiful and extremely hateful young man in front of her. She knew that the other party was threatening her with a secret. After a moment of silence, she stealthily led Qinghai 2 steps to a quiet place to avoid the ears of her companions. She then said in an extremely low voice, What do you want to do? Qinghai slightly lowered his eyes, as if he did not know how to open his mouth. He slowly said, It's the humble request from before. Please dance with me. How can you be so shameless? Zhou Yu's eyes were as cold as knives. Together with her fiery red dress, she had a terrifying beauty. Because of what happened that day, you want to take revenge? You should know what the first dance of the Double Moon Festival Ball represents. Do you think that I will be threatened by you and ruin the life that I have desired for more than 10 years? Qinghai slightly frowned as he looked at the beauty in front of him. He slowly said, Maybe the future that you have desired for so long is not what you really want. Otherwise, why would you get drunk that night a year ago and then casually give up your virginity? Su Lun narrowed his eyes as he looked at the group of people around Zhang Xiaoming. He felt that the atmosphere was a bit strange. A few songs had already passed, but the well-dressed men and women still did not dance. If they were not here to dance, why would they come to Yue University? He keenly observed that those people seemed to be waiting for something to happen. Suddenly, he remembered the conversation he had with Qinghai in the bar that night. His heart skipped a beat, and he looked at Zhang Xiaoming worriedly. At this moment, there was the sound of slap. Su Lu was shocked to see that in the far corner, the eldest daughter of the Zhou family had angrily splashed the champagne in her glass onto Qinghai's face. At the same time, she gave him a hard slap on the face. He did not know what had happened. As he was about to go over to take a look, he was pulled back by the middle-aged man beside him. Although the music in the ball was soft, the countless sweet nothings added together made it a bit noisy. Other than that group of people and Su Lu who had been staring over there, not many people noticed this small episode. Qinghai's wet hair draped weakly on his forehead. He silently walked back, stared at his uncle, and then stood beside Su Lu. He sighed and said, A flower with thorns is indeed wonderful. After Zhou Yu, who liked to wear red, rejected Qinghai's threat, she walked back to her friends. However, her fingers holding the empty wine glass were slightly trembling, and her face was slightly pale. The middle-aged man standing behind Su Lu and Qinghai suddenly smiled and said, Qinghai, you can change your name to Lianhua in the future. At this moment, the Double Moon Festival Ball suddenly became quiet. The strings of the cello were gently plucked, making a buzzing sound, reminding everyone present that someone was about to speak. The lights gradually dimmed, and a double round silver-white beam of light shot up to the second floor, just like the two moons that could be seen through the transparent dome. In the beam of light,